captivating journey through the intricate tapestry of ancient Greece often leads one down winding paths, inviting contemplation of a bygone era. Following the ethereal presence of Hermes, the swift messenger god renowned for the winged sandals that bore him across realms. This exploration would unveil sacred sanctuaries, serene grottos nestled in rugged peaks, and the sun-dusted thoroughfares where ancient travellers once paused to leave their humble offerings at unassuming stone markers. The very air seemed to hum with untold stories waiting to be discovered. As the modern world's clamour recedes, much like the ephemeral morning mist dissolving over the sun-drenched Mediterranean hills, a profound tranquillity often descends. One might imagine preparing for such an immersive experience, perhaps by softening the surrounding illumination and finding comfort in a favourite wrap, allowing the day's cacophony to dissipate entirely. It is a universal experience, this contemplation of ancient tales, whether one's local sky is painted with the fiery hues of a setting sun or subtly illuminated by the quiet approach of dawn. Indeed, the enduring allure of these narratives bridges vast distances, uniting listeners from diverse corners of the globe in a shared, peaceful moment, transcending the boundaries of time zones. With the stage thus set, perhaps accompanied by a subtle, soothing hum of a distant fan and a sense of cosy anticipation, the journey into the captivating narratives of ancient Greece's most ingenious deity is poised to commence. The stage is perfectly arranged for an encounter with the wiles and wisdom of this extraordinary figure. In the hushed moments preceding dawn, when the ancient Greek world lay slumbering, enveloped in the ethereal pre-dawn luminescence that heralds the sun's ascent, an astute observer might have perceived a fleeting presence traversing the heavens. It was no ordinary avian creature, nor a drifting cloud. With a discerning gaze and a moment of stillness, one might have discerned the figure of a youthful man, gracefully gliding through the air, his feet seemingly brushing the uppermost branches of ancient olive trees. His attire included what appeared to be miniature feathered appendages fastened to his sandals. This was unmistakably Hermes, and even during these earliest hours, when the vast majority of the world remained in repose, the agile messenger god was already diligently engaged in his daily endeavours. Indeed, the paramount role of being the god's celestial courier was far from a leisurely undertaking. It was a position demanding unparalleled swiftness and unwavering efficiency. Whenever Zeus, the formidable sovereign of the Olympian pantheon, possessed a pronouncement of great import, its dissemination required immediate and unfaltering speed. Similarly, when the revered Hera sought to transmit tidings to her divine sister goddesses, it was Hermes who was entrusted with this crucial task. In essence, any deity residing upon the majestic Mount Olympus who required an action or communication within the mortal realm invariably summoned the indispensable Hermes. Yet, a distinctive quality set Hermes apart from the rest of the Olympian assembly, distinguishing him in a profound way. While Zeus wielded the fearsome lightning bolts and Poseidon commanded the tumultuous oceans, while Athena meticulously strategized for grand battles and Apollo composed celestial poetry of exquisite beauty, Hermes approached and resolved his challenges with an attribute far more subtle, often significantly more potent, his unrivaled ingenuity and sharp intellect. This quiet power, often underestimated, was his most formidable weapon. Envision a quintessential morning tableau unfolding in ancient Greece. The nascent sun's rays have just begun to impart a gentle warmth upon the polished marble steps of a grand temple consecrated to Zeus. A venerable priest, cloaked in austere white vestments, circumnavigates the sacred edifice with deliberate steps, meticulously ensuring every detail is prepared for the day's forthcoming ceremonies. The ancient olive trees whisper softly in the caressing morning breeze, and from a remote distance the faint, gentle bleating of goats being guided to their pasture can be discerned. Suddenly the priest's measured progress halts as his gaze falls upon an anomaly. Seated upon the very steps of the temple, exuding an air of complete composure, and utterly devoid of any semblance of trespassing on hallowed ground, is a young man whom the priest has never before encountered. The enigmatic stranger is clad in a simple tunic, crowned by a peculiar hat that appears to be fashioned from feathers. Most remarkably, his sandals are adorned with what can only be described as delicate miniature wings. Under ordinary circumstances, one might anticipate the priest to react with alarm. Temples, after all, were sanctified spaces demanding reverence, and uninvited strangers were certainly not expected to appear and settle in with such nonchalance. Yet, surprisingly, instead of apprehension, the priest found himself enveloped in an inexplicable sense of tranquillity. The young man possessed an engaging smile, one that instantly elicited an immediate, unbidden sense of trust, even as the precise reason for such an impression remained elusive. The stranger then offered a greeting, his voice possessing a mellifluous cadence that harmonized perfectly with the soft murmuring of the morning breeze through the ancient olive trees. He expressed a hope that his presence was not an intrusion, before delivering a statement that would undoubtedly seize the priest's full attention. "A message awaits you," the stranger announced, "directly from Zeus himself." The priest's eyes widened in astonishment, for direct communications from Zeus were not daily occurrences. Indeed, the vast majority of priests dedicated their entire lives to service without ever being granted such a profound personal audience with the sovereign of the gods. "A message?" the priest inquired, his voice barely rising above a hushed, incredulous tone. Hermes responded with a brief nod, then, with an almost imperceptible movement, reached into a small satchel the priest had not previously observed. From within, he produced a scroll that seemed to exude a subtle, ethereal glow in the nascent morning light. The divine messenger then conveyed Zeus's commendation, assuring the priest of the king of the gods' immense satisfaction with the diligent care bestowed upon his temple. Specifically, Hermes highlighted the meticulous attention paid to ensuring the olive oil in the lamps remained fresh, and the steps were swept with such unwavering precision each morning. A profound sense of contentment and vindication spread through the priest's chest. It was undeniable that he took immense pride in his sacred duties. Yet he had never dared to imagine that Zeus himself had taken notice of his humble, dedicated efforts. However, Hermes's narrative continued, his tone shifting to a graver, more cautionary inflection. He revealed that Zeus also wished to impart a significant warning. A merchant, he explained, was destined to visit the temple later that very day, intending to offer for sale what he would claim was a sacred statue of Zeus, purportedly sculpted by Athens's most celebrated artisans. The priest leaned forward, his attention now fully captivated. Hermes elaborated, detailing that while the statue would indeed possess a certain beauty, and the merchant's accompanying tale would be exceptionally convincing, Zeus desired to make it known that the effigy was, in reality, merely commonplace marble, crafted by the merchant's brother-in-law, a competent sculptor perhaps, but assuredly not among Athens's preeminent artists. The merchant's true intention, Hermes revealed, was to cunningly deceive the priest into paying a sum far exceeding the statue's actual value. This was a critical piece of intelligence, delivered with divine authority. It was at this juncture that the unparalleled depth of Hermes's astute sagacity truly came to the fore. Unbeknownst to the reverent priest, the divine communication concerning a deceitful merchant was entirely a fabrication by Hermes. Yet the messenger god, whose boundless travels granted him intimate knowledge of every occurrence across the Hellenic lands, possessed foreknowledge that a duplicitous peddler was indeed poised to visit the temple later that day, armed with a spurious tale about a sacred statue. Hermes's omniscience was not mystical in this instance. Only yesterday, for example, he had casually overheard the merchant rehearsing his elaborate sales pitch while resting beneath a fig tree merely 20 meters distant. Possessing a particular affinity for honest, diligent individuals such as this priest, Hermes simply could not countenance the thought of such a man being defrauded. Therefore, with a stroke of genius, Hermes created an ingenious, benevolent fabrication about a message from Zeus, strategically deploying a minor untruth to safeguard the priest from a far more damaging deception concerning a supposedly sacred artifact. This precise brand of inventive thinking was precisely what cemented Hermes's renown throughout ancient Greece. He possessed a profound understanding that, on occasion, the most effective counter to dishonesty lay in employing a distinct form of strategic misdirection, one designed to protect the virtuous rather than exploit them. The priest, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude, expressed his profound gratitude to Hermes for delivering such a vital message. Hermes, in turn, offered a simple, knowing smile and inclined his distinctive feathered headwear, a gesture that conveyed a casual, all-in-a-day's work sentiment. He then retreated a few paces from the temple, and the priest watched in utter amazement as the delicate wings adorning Hermes's sandals began to flutter with increasing vigour. Within mere moments, the divine courier ascended effortlessly into the sky, gliding gracefully over the verdant olive groves, already bound for his next urgent destination. As anticipated, later that very afternoon, a merchant indeed arrived at the temple, his cart laden with what he proclaimed to be a sacred statue of Zeus. The priest listened with polite attentiveness to the peddler's convoluted narrative, replete with mentions of renowned Athenian artists and hallowed marble. Yet, fortified by Hermes's prescient warning, the priest remained utterly impervious to the deception. With unwavering courtesy, he declined to acquire the statue, and the disgruntled peddler, his scheme thwarted, was compelled to seek his fortunes elsewhere. That evening, as the priest meticulously lit the oil lamps within the temple for the night's vigil, his thoughts naturally drifted back to his extraordinary encounter with Hermes. There was an element almost mysteriously opportune in the messenger god's appearance, arriving precisely when his assistance was most crucial. What the priest did not fully comprehend was that this precise, impeccably timed intervention was a hallmark of Hermes's characteristic approach to aiding mortals. Central to Hermes's distinct persona was his uncanny discernment of human character. He possessed an innate ability to perceive with startling clarity the true nature of individuals, simply by observing them. He could instantly identify the virtuous priests and the duplicitous merchants, the benevolent shopkeepers and the ruthless tax collectors, the generous farmers and the avaricious landowners. This profound insight into the human heart was the very foundation upon which he based his decisions, determining when to extend his aid and when, occasionally, to meted out his cunning stratagems upon those who, by their deeds, had truly earned them. Yet the scope of Hermes's ingenuity extended far beyond merely resolving the predicaments of others. He was celebrated across the ancient world for the remarkably creative and often whimsical methods he employed to extricate himself from challenging circumstances. On one notable occasion, when tasked with conveying an imperative message to Hera, he was acutely aware of her simmering displeasure with Zeus and the potential for her frustration to be unjustly directed at the messenger. With characteristic flair, Hermes assumed the guise of an elderly flower seller, approaching Hera's temple laden with a basket containing the most exquisite roses imaginable. Upon beholding the resplendent blossoms, Hera was instantly captivated, expressing a keen interest in acquiring some for her sacred dwelling. As she meticulously selected roses and engaged in a pleasant conversation with the disguised Hermes about the optimal methods for preserving cut flowers, he adroitly interjected a casual remark, mentioning an intriguing piece of news he had overheard regarding Zeus's latest benevolent plan for assisting mortals. By the time Hera fully comprehended that she had, in fact, received Zeus's message, she was already so thoroughly charmed and mollified by the beautiful roses that her divine wrath had utterly dissipated. This was the epitome of Hermes's unique approach, resolving a complex problem in a manner that invariably left all parties involved in a more agreeable state than before. He truly grasped that the most effective stratagems were not those that left individuals feeling foolish, but rather those that subtly, yet profoundly enhanced the quality of life for everyone caught in their clever weave. As twilight descends upon the ancient lands of Greece, and the final embers of oil lamps cast their faint glow within hallowed temples and familial dwellings across the expansive terrain, one might ponder the myriad other clandestine acts of sagacity Hermes might have executed under the cloak of night. What further unscrupulous merchants did he cunningly outmaneuver and foil? What additional diligent priests did he covertly safeguard and champion? What other ingenious solutions did he artfully craft for predicaments that appeared utterly insurmountable? The Hellenic people of antiquity firmly believed that Hermes never truly succumbed to repose, that even during the deepest, most shadowed hours of the nocturnal realm, he was perpetually active somewhere in the vast world, deploying his sharp intellect and profound discernment to subtly ameliorate circumstances for those deemed worthy of his divine intervention. And perhaps, as one drifts toward slumber this very evening, a gentle imagining might conjure the ethereal whisper of winged sandals soaring overhead, conveying their astute wearer towards his subsequent benevolent escapade. However, this sagacious messenger deity, whose exploits we recounted in our previous narrative, was not always the seasoned problem-solver, effortlessly navigating the verdant expanse of olive groves with such elegant prowess. Like all burgeoning beings, even those of divine lineage, Hermes had to commence his journey somewhere. And remarkably, his inaugural feat of cunning occurred when he was but a mere infant, not yet having completed a single day of existence. Envision, if you will, the serene cavern nestled within the slopes of Mount Cillin, the sacred birthplace of Hermes to his mother, the graceful nymph Maia. This secluded grotto was meticulously tucked away in a tranquil recess of the formidable mountain, enshrouded by wild aromatic herbs that imbued the surrounding air with the delicate, earthy fragrances of thyme and oregano. Within, the cave offered a surprisingly cozy sanctuary, with plush furs generously strewn across its rugged, stony floor, and a modest fire merrily crackling near the entrance, its dancing flames casting ephemeral shadows upon the ancient rock walls. Maia had deliberately chosen this concealed locale precisely because she yearned for an environment of absolute privacy to nurture her extraordinary offspring. For you see, Zeus claimed paternity of Hermes, and Maia was keenly aware that Hera, Zeus's formidable consort, harboured a distinct antipathy towards her husband's progeny, conceived with other goddesses or mortals. Thus, the remote mountain grotto appeared to be the quintessential haven for a tranquil, undisturbed infancy. What Maia utterly failed to anticipate, however, was the decidedly untranquil nature of her newborn Hermes. Upon waking in her snug cavern, Maia expected to discover her infant son slumbering peacefully within the soft, meticulously arranged nest of blankets she had prepared for him. Instead, her gaze met an astonishing void. The baby was nowhere to be found. The blankets lay undisturbed, yet empty, and there was no discernible trace of the child anywhere within the confines of the cave. Now one might reasonably surmise that Maia would be gripped by an overwhelming panic. After all, her son was less than 24 hours old, and the perilous mountainside teemed with untamed beasts and treacherous precipitous cliffs. Yet, as she stood poised at the cave's mouth, her gaze sweeping across the ethereal, misty morning landscape, a faint smile began to grace Maia's lips. She was, after all, a nymph, endowed with her own unique array of mystical capabilities. And what those inherent powers were conveying to her was an unequivocal assurance. Her precious baby was not in peril. Quite the contrary, in fact, he appeared to be revelling in the grand adventure of his nascent existence. Concurrently, some 50 miles distant, Apollo, the resplendent deity of the sun and harmonious melodies, was commencing his own day with a most agreeable morning ritual. Apollo maintained a magnificent herd of sacred cattle in an exquisite meadow situated near the ancient town of Pylos. These were no mere common bovine creatures. They were divine cattle, impeccably white, their majestic golden horns gleaming with an otherworldly luminescence under the sun's nascent rays. Each morning Apollo would conscientiously visit this pastoral expanse to inspect his cherished herd, meticulously counting every single animal and ensuring their robust health and contented disposition. The meadow where Apollo pastured his cattle was truly a sight of unparalleled splendor. Imagine undulating green hills adorned with a profusion of wildflowers, a crystalline stream meandering gracefully through its heart, and venerable oak trees providing an ideal dappled shade for the animals during the sweltering afternoon hours. The grass was perpetually vibrant and emerald, the water consistently pure and translucent, and the cattle themselves seemed to radiate an intrinsic luminosity that eloquently mirrored their celestial essence. On this particular dawn, however, Apollo arrived at his cherished meadow to confront a most perplexing anomaly. The cattle were absent, every single one of them. Where there should have been 50 magnificent white cows placidly grazing in the morning sun, there was nothing but an expanse of barren grass and a scattering of rather bewildered-looking butterflies. Apollo stood at the periphery of his meadow, striving desperately to comprehend the inexplicable scene before him. Cattle do not simply vanish into thin air, particularly not divine cattle. They possess no wings to take flight, and they are far too immense to conceal themselves behind the venerable oak trees. And yet there was absolutely no vestige of them anywhere. Then Apollo's discerning eye caught sight of something peculiar about the earth near the meandering stream. There were footprints, to be sure, but they were unlike any he had ever encountered. They bore the unmistakable imprint of cattle hooves, yet their orientation was entirely incongruous. Instead of pointing away from the meadow, as one would logically expect from animals departing the area, these hoof prints appeared to indicate movement towards the meadow, as if the entire herd had somehow ambled backward out of their verdant pasture. Now Apollo was not one to be easily deceived. As one of the most astute and intelligent deities residing on Mount Olympus, he instantaneously grasped that someone had deliberately endeavoured to mislead him by compelling the cattle to walk in reverse, thereby creating tracks that would deceptively suggest their entry into the meadow rather than their exit. But who would possess the sheer audacity to pilfer from a god? And, more pertinently, who would be ingenious enough to conceive such an extraordinary method to obfuscate the act of theft? Apollo diligently traced the backward hoof prints for numerous miles, traversing dense forests and fording sparkling streams, scaling formidable hills and descending into shadowy valleys. The winding trail led him progressively farther and farther from his own meadow, meandering through some of the most isolated and breathtaking regions of ancient Greece. Along his arduous journey he encountered shepherds diligently tending their flocks, farmers toiling in their fields, and wayfarers striding along dusty thoroughfares. Apollo meticulously inquired of everyone he met whether they had witnessed anything out of the ordinary. Perhaps a large herd of white cattle being guided by an individual of suspicious mien. But here lay the profound strangeness. Every person Apollo engaged with furnished him with essentially the identical account. Yes, they had indeed seen the cattle. The magnificent animals had unquestionably passed by, and quite recently too. However, when Apollo pressed for details concerning the person leading them, he received the most utterly bizarre and improbable responses. "Oh, yes," affirmed an elderly shepherd, thoughtfully stroking his beard. "I observed the cattle as clear as the brightest day. Truly splendid creatures. But the most peculiar aspect was that they seemed to be following a mere babe. A baby." Apollo interjected, convinced he had entirely misapprehended the shepherd's words. "That is precisely correct," the shepherd affirmed with a nod. "Just a tiny child. Couldn't have been more than a single day old, yet striding along with an astonishing self-assurance, with 50 head of cattle dutifully trailing behind him as if he were their very dam." Apollo gleaned remarkably similar testimonies from every other individual he encountered along the winding trail. A farmer's wife solemnly swore she had beheld an infant herding cattle with a rudimentary staff he had ingeniously fashioned from a simple reed. A company of itinerant merchants adamantly insisted they had watched a baby somehow persuade an entire herd of cows to perambulate backward. Each successive narrative surpassed the last in its sheer impossibility, yet they all maintained a striking and unsettling consistency. The elusive trail ultimately guided Apollo to the very foot of Mount Selene, where the backward hoof prints abruptly vanished into a craggy, rocky expanse, where further tracking became utterly unfeasible. Nevertheless, Apollo's meticulous investigative endeavours had furnished him with sufficient clues to formulate an informed conjecture regarding the potential whereabouts of his cherished cattle. If indeed an infant truly bore responsibility for this audacious larceny, and Apollo was grudgingly beginning to concede that such a notion might actually be plausible, then that infant must surely reside somewhere in the immediate vicinity. Apollo commenced a thorough reconnaissance of the mountainside, meticulously scrutinizing every cave and potential hiding spot where someone might conceal a herd of purloined cattle. It was not long before he chanced upon a narrow, secluded valley, cleverly screened by a dense curtain of pine trees. And nestled within that very valley, grazing with an almost unnerving tranquillity, as if they had always belonged there, were his 50 sacred cattle. Yet there remained no discernible sign of the enigmatic baby thief. Apollo dedicated the greater portion of the afternoon to methodically searching every accessible cave and crevice within the expansive area. Finally, just as the golden orb of the sun was commencing its descent below the horizon, he unearthed a surprisingly cosy cave situated higher up on the rugged mountainside. A warm, inviting light flickered gently from its entrance, and Apollo could distinctly discern the soft melodic sound of someone humming a lullaby. Stepping inside the cavern, Apollo discovered Maya seated beside a small crackling fire, tenderly rocking what appeared to be a perfectly ordinary, utterly innocent baby. The infant was snugly enshrouded in soft, comforting blankets. His eyes were serenely closed, and he seemed to be sleeping with the profound peacefulness of any newborn child in the entire world. "Excuse me," Apollo uttered with an impeccable politeness. "I am in pursuit of an individual who purloined my cattle. Several people along the way informed me that they witnessed a mere baby leading my herd away from its designated pasture." Maya slowly lifted her gaze, her face adopting the kind of sweet, feigned surprise that mothers often exhibit when they believe someone has uttered something utterly preposterous about their offspring. A baby. She let out a soft, gentle laugh. "Sir, I truly believe you must be gravely mistaken. My son was born only yesterday. Just observe him. He can barely manage to lift his own head, let alone orchestrate the theft of an entire herd of cattle." And indeed, the tiny infant cradled in Maya's arms presented an image of complete incapability for any form of mischief. His minuscule fists were delicately curled near his face, and he emitted the soft rhythmic breathing sounds characteristic of peacefully slumbering newborns. Apollo began to harbour a nascent doubt, wondering if he had, perhaps, committed some egregious error in judgment. But then, just as Apollo was on the very cusp of offering an apology for his intrusion and preparing to depart, the baby's left eye fluttered open, and he delivered an unmistakable, confident wink. It was such a swift, subtle gesture that Apollo very nearly overlooked it, yet there was absolutely no mistaking what he had unequivocally witnessed. This seemingly innocent infant had just winked at him with the brazen self-assurance of someone who had masterfully executed an elaborate practical joke, and was, quite evidently, immensely proud of his own ingenious accomplishment. "All right," the radiant Apollo declared, striving to suppress the burgeoning smile that threatened to betray his stern facade. "I am fully aware that you have absconded with my prized cattle. The pertinent inquiry now is, what measures do you intend to take regarding their prompt restitution?" At this precise juncture, the infant Hermes, seemingly deciding that the elaborate charade had run its course, abruptly sat upright within the confines of his swaddling blankets. He presented an appearance of profound alertness, an acuity far exceeding what any day-old babe had a legitimate right to exhibit, and favoured Apollo with a grin that was the very embodiment of pure, unadulterated mischief. "Your cherished cattle are in absolutely no peril," Hermes asserted, his voice, though still possessing the delicate, high-pitched quality of a newborn, resonating with an unmistakable undertone of profound pride. "Indeed, I have been affording them the most exemplary care. They are thoroughly nourished, generously watered, and I harbour the distinct impression that they rather relished their unexpected excursion." Maya, witnessing this extraordinary exchange, gazed at her diminutive son with an expression of utter astonishment. While she had always perceived him as uniquely special, she had certainly not anticipated him commencing articulate speech at such an astonishingly early stage, nor, for that matter, embarking upon a career of bovine larceny. Apollo, meanwhile, found himself genuinely captivated and profoundly impressed. That manoeuvre with the backward hoofprints was an exceptionally clever stratagem, he conceded, a note of admiration entering his voice. "I confess I have never before encountered anything quite like it. Pray tell, how did you manage to persuade the cattle to traverse in reverse?" Hermes, visibly gratified by the unexpected commendation, preened slightly. "I fashioned miniature coverings for their hooves," he meticulously elucidated. "These coverings, designed to resemble hooves themselves, were ingeniously attached in reverse. Consequently, when the cattle ambled forward, their imprints suggested they were proceeding in the opposite direction. It was such a remarkably astute and intricately conceived scheme that Apollo found himself irresistibly impressed, even though, by the strict definition of events, he was the aggrieved party in this audacious theft. Here was an infant, barely a day old, who had not merely succeeded in pilfering divine livestock, but had executed the feat with a level of creative ingenuity and elaborate planning that surpassed the capabilities of most seasoned adult malefactors. "Well," Apollo finally pronounced, a note of reluctant admiration in his tone, "I must candidly admit that this is quite possibly the most astonishing cattle rustling in the annals of recorded history, but notwithstanding its brilliance, I do require the return of my cows." Of course, Hermes assented with surprising alacrity. "It was always my firm intention to restore them. I merely wish to ascertain the feasibility of such an endeavour." And so, as the first twinkling stars began to emerge in the darkening evening sky above the majestic Mount Selene, Apollo and the day-old Hermes descended together into the secluded hidden valley to reclaim the sacred bovine herd. The cows, for their part, appeared utterly content and displayed no discernible signs of trauma from their recent adventure. If anything, they seemed rather pleased with their involvement, as if they too had thoroughly enjoyed being integral participants in such a remarkably elaborate ruse. As Apollo made preparations to guide his precious herd back to their accustomed pasture, his thoughts inevitably turned to the truly remarkable infant he had just encountered. Here was a child who, at less than 24 hours old, had already demonstrated a depth of cleverness and a breadth of creative ingenuity that the vast majority of individuals fail to cultivate over an entire lifetime. Perhaps, Apollo mused as he observed Hermes waving a tiny farewell from the sanctuary of his mother's embrace, this would not be the final occasion their disparate paths would intertwine. A profound intuition suggested to him that a baby capable of orchestrating such an intricate and audacious prank was undeniably destined for extraordinary accomplishments, and as one settles into the tranquillity of their own peaceful evening, one might readily envision baby Hermes nestled back within the comforting confines of his cozy cave, finally yielding to sound sleep after his inaugural grand escapade, while his mother Maya sits vigilantly beside him, pondering with a mixture of awe and apprehension what astonishing feat her remarkable son would conceive of next. The infant trickster, whom we last observed in a state of tranquil slumber within his mountain sanctuary, did not, in fact, remain sequestered on Mount Selene for an extended duration. Word of Hermes, audacious cattle-pilfering adventure, possessed an inherent velocity, travelling with remarkable swiftness among the celestial denizens of Olympus. Consequently, it was not many days before Zeus himself, the venerable king of the gods, resolved that he must personally meet this truly extraordinary child. Mount Selene, in those ancient days, was a domain of unparalleled quiet beauty. One might conjure an image of endless undulating slopes lavishly carpeted with fragrant wild lavender and aromatic rosemary, where the ethereal morning mist clung tenaciously to the gnarled branches of ancient pine trees. The only sounds that punctuated the profound stillness were the distant melodious tinkling of goat bells and the soft, almost imperceptible whisper of the wind as it rustled through the abundant herbs. Maya's humble cave was situated high upon the mountainside, strategically positioned to capture the very first golden rays of sunrise each morning and the last lingering burnished light of evening. Inside the cavern, the 3-day-old Hermes was already exhibiting unmistakable indicators that he was no ordinary infant. While most babes of his tender age were content to indulge in prolonged periods of sleep and sustenance, Hermes dedicated his waking hours to meticulously scrutinizing every facet of his surroundings with an intense, almost scholarly curiosity. He would recline in his soft, protective blankets, his bright eyes tracking the mesmerizing dance of shadows upon the cave walls, his keen ears attuned to the myriad sounds of birdsong from outside. One could almost palpably discern his diminutive mind diligently at work, assiduously processing information and meticulously cataloguing it for future application. Maya, for her part, had spent these 3 preceding days immersed in a state of gentle, perpetual amazement at her son's astonishingly rapid developmental trajectory. On his 2nd day of existence, she had discovered him seated perfectly upright, his gaze fixed with the focused intensity of a seasoned scholar upon a simple pebble. By his 3rd day, he had somehow managed to silently propel himself to the very entrance of the cave and back again, apparently driven by an insatiable desire to simply observe the panoramic view from a multitude of different perspectives. It was precisely mid-morning on the 4th day when Zeus made his heralded arrival at the cave, He did not herald his presence with the customary dramatic displays of thunderous roars and blinding lightning bolts, as he sometimes chose to do when his intention was to make an indelible impression. Instead, he simply materialized at the cave entrance, assuming the unassuming guise of a benevolent traveller, clad in a simple brown cloak and leaning upon a sturdy walking staff. Only his eyes, which held the profound depth and ancient wisdom of an entity who had personally witnessed the very genesis of the cosmos, subtly betrayed his true divine identity. "Good morning, Maya," Zeus greeted her gently, his voice imbued with a quiet warmth. "I trust you do not object to an old friend paying an unexpected call to make the acquaintance of the newest addition to our extended family." Maya, having anticipated this very visitation ever since the notorious cattle incident, offered a knowing smile and motioned for Zeus to enter the cave, its welcoming interior. "He has, in fact, been awaiting your arrival," she confided. "I believe he perceives your true nature." And indeed the infant Hermes had, with uncanny precision, turned his head toward the cave entrance the very instant Zeus appeared, his bright, intelligent eyes fixed upon his father with an expression of discerning interest that was truly remarkable in one so incredibly young. Zeus settled himself comfortably, cross-legged, upon the soft furs that lay beside Hermes, blanket and meticulously studied his son. The infant, in turn, returned his gaze with an equally intense and unwavering attention, and for a protracted moment the cave was filled with a palpable, comfortable silence, as father and son quietly took each other's measure. So Zeus finally broke the stillness, his voice resonating with warm amusement. "I hear you have already succeeded in making quite a memorable impression upon your brother Apollo." Hermes gurgled contentedly and extended one tiny inquisitive hand toward Zeus's magnificent beard. When Zeus, with a tender inclination of his head, leaned closer so that the baby could reach it, Hermes promptly grasped a small, silken handful of the divine whiskers and tugged gently, as if conducting a playful authenticity test. "He has been precisely like this since the moment of his birth," Maya elucidated, a fond smile gracing her lips. "Always investigating every conceivable object, always striving to comprehend the intricate workings of things. Only yesterday I discovered him diligently attempting to dismantle the clasp on my cloak. He appeared quite frustrated that he could not immediately decipher its complex mechanism." Zeus chuckled softly and with a delicate touch gently extricated his beard from Hermes' tenacious grip. "Intelligence, it seems, is a pervasive trait within our lineage," he remarked, a note of paternal pride in his voice. "However, this little one appears to have been blessed with an extraordinarily generous helping of curiosity to accompany his innate intellect." What transpired next was an event that Maya would undoubtedly cherish and recall with vivid clarity for the entirety of her exceptionally long life. Zeus reached into the folds of his cloak and produced a small, exquisitely crafted object that seemed to emanate its own ethereal inner light. It was a caduceus, a magnificent golden staff crowned with two intricately intertwined serpents and a delicate pair of small feathered wings. "This sacred emblem belonged to my previous messenger," Zeus elucidated to Hermes, holding the staff at a height where the baby could clearly perceive its splendor. "She was a truly remarkable goddess named Iris, renowned for carrying my messages across the heavens on glorious rainbow bridges. However, Iris has recently chosen to embrace new responsibilities, dedicating her efforts to assisting mortals with their verdant gardens and vibrant flowers, which, consequently, necessitates the appointment of a new messenger. Hermes, his eyes wide with an almost childlike fascination, reached out toward the shimmering caduceus with both tiny hands. The very instant his minuscule fingers made contact with the golden staff, something truly extraordinary occurred. The delicate wings positioned at the apex of the caduceus began to flutter with a gentle, almost imperceptible motion, and the two serpentine forms wrapped around the staff's shaft commenced to undulate, sliding smoothly and gracefully around each other in an endless, mesmerizing dance. "I believe he finds it rather appealing," Maya observed with a quiet smile, her voice tinged with wonder. "More than merely appealing," Zeus corrected, his gaze fixed upon Hermes, who had somehow managed to grip the staff firmly despite its length being nearly commensurate with his own stature. "Observe his feet." Maya's eyes instinctively followed Zeus' instruction, and she gasped softly in astonishment. Small, iridescent golden wings had miraculously materialized upon Hermes, tiny bare feet. These nascent wings perfectly mirrored the delicate pair adorning the caduceus. They fluttered with a gentle, tentative motion, as if testing their newfound capabilities, and Hermes, in response to this wondrous sensation, erupted into a peal of pure, unadulterated delight. The esteemed position of divine messenger is not a role one simply applies for, Zeus explained to his infant son, his voice imbued with a profound gravitas. It is rather a destiny one is inherently born for, and I believe it is now abundantly clear that you, my son, were unequivocally born for this momentous task. Over the course of the ensuing hour, Zeus meticulously outlined to Hermes the multifaceted responsibilities that would be incumbent upon him as the messenger god. There would, of course, be frequent and essential journeys to the majestic Mount Olympus, where he would receive crucial messages and directives from the other powerful deities. There would be arduous and extensive flights across the vast expanse of the ancient world, meticulously delivering vital communications to both mortals and immortals alike. He would be tasked with resolving intricate problems, mediating contentious disputes, and always, without fail, exhibiting an unwavering need to think with swiftness and ingenuity when situations inevitably became convoluted or challenging. Hermes absorbed all of this information with the intense, unwavering attention of an individual genuinely thrilled by a significant career opportunity. When Zeus proceeded to describe the more intricate and demanding facets of the work, the occasions when messages had to be conveyed to reluctant recipients, or when the messenger was compelled to devise creative methodologies to accomplish seemingly impossible tasks, Hermes' eyes lit up with a particularly keen and discernible interest. "I believe," Zeus ultimately declared, "that you are destined to excel immensely in this particular endeavor." Yet Zeus's elucidation of Hermes' newly conferred station was far from complete. The esteemed position of divine messenger, it transpired, encompassed a multitude of additional responsibilities. But Hermes was also designated as the revered god of all who journeyed, extending his watchful gaze over individuals who ventured far from their native abodes. He would serve as the steadfast protector of merchants and traders, facilitating their engagement in equitable commerce and safeguarding them from the predations of brigands and deceivers. Furthermore, he was tasked with the solemn duty of guarding boundaries and borders, ensuring that the solemn covenants between adjacent realms were meticulously upheld. Perhaps most profoundly, Zeus expounded, Hermes was destined to function as an intermediary, a guide traversing the distinct planes of existence. At times, his office would necessitate the conveyance of vital communiques between the vibrant sphere of the living and the shadowy dominion of the deceased. On other occasions, he would lend his aid to lost souls, assisting them in navigating their way to their rightful and ultimate destinations. It was, indeed, a weighty undertaking, a task demanding not merely sharp intellect, but also profound empathy and sagacious judgment. As Zeus articulated these profound assignments, a discernible transformation seemed to alight upon Hermes, who appeared to grow progressively more attentive and mature with each passing moment. By the time his celestial father concluded the exposition of his manifold duties, the infant god had assumed a more upright posture, grasping his caduceus with an undeniable air of self-assurance, embodying every aspect of the divine herald he was predestined to become. "There remains but one final item," Zeus announced, once more reaching into the folds of his flowing cloak. This time he withdrew a diminutive traveller's hat, meticulously crafted from soft felt, featuring a broad brim expressly designed to offer impeccable shelter from both the scorching sun and the drenching rain. "Every emissary requires appropriate accoutrements," he stated. When Zeus gently placed the hat upon Hermes's head, it settled with perfect fit, and instantaneously miniature wings sprouted from either side of its crown, mirroring the ethereal wings already adorning his feet and his staff. Hermes instinctively reached up to caress the hat's new appendages, and they fluttered delicately at his touch, emitting a sound reminiscent of soft, melodious laughter. Maya observed this entire sequence of events with a tapestry of conflicting emotions. Her heart swelled with immense pride for her son, and she felt a thrill of anticipation for his momentous new role. However, a subtle undercurrent of sorrow also permeated her thoughts as she contemplated the imminent conclusion of her tranquil days within the mountain cave. Hermes would henceforth be required to dedicate his time to Mount Olympus, diligently learning the intricacies of his responsibilities and becoming acquainted with the other Olympian deities. Yet Zeus, with his profound insight, seemed to comprehend her maternal sentiments. "He shall forever retain a cherished abode here with you," Zeus assured her tenderly. "Mount Selene will perpetually serve as his revered birthplace, his sanctuary of retreat, whenever he seeks solace and quietude. This very cave shall remain his inviolable haven." And thus it transpired that Hermes, at an astonishingly tender age of barely 4 days, ascended to the prestigious office of messenger to the gods. Nevertheless, his departure from Mount Selene was not immediate. Instead, Zeus thoughtfully proposed that he spend a few additional days in the company of his mother, allowing him to acclimate to his burgeoning divine capabilities and to practice with his newly acquired celestial equipment. These subsequent days were characterized by a period of gentle yet purposeful experimentation. Hermes diligently learned to manipulate the wings on his sandals, causing them to flutter with just enough velocity to elevate him a few inches above the ground. He assiduously practiced gripping his caduceus with precision, and soon discovered its innate power to help him discern the thoughts and sentiments of all those he encountered. For hours he ambled around the mountainside, growing accustomed to the feel of his new hat and relishing the delightful sensation of how its nascent wings kept his head refreshingly cool, even beneath the warmth of the afternoon sun. Maya, in turn, watched her son's remarkable progress with a sense of profound wonder and immense pride. Here was a child unmistakably destined for extraordinary achievements, yet one who still found ample time to meticulously examine intriguing geological formations and to playfully pursue butterflies amidst the fragrant mountain herbs. This singular amalgamation of nascent divine power and an innocent, childlike curiosity rendered him utterly unparalleled among all the gods she had ever known. On his final eve within the cave, prior to his inaugural official journey to the majestic Mount Olympus, Hermes sat companionably with his mother at the cave's entrance, together watching the sun descend in a spectacular display over the serene panorama of ancient Greece. The effulgent golden light caused his newly bestowed wings to shimmer with an ethereal glow, and the gentle evening breeze playfully stirred the delicate feathers adorning his hat. "Are you apprehensive about tomorrow?" Maya inquired softly, her voice filled with maternal concern. Hermes pondered the question with earnest gravity before formulating his reply. "A little," he conceded, "but predominantly I am filled with excitement. I genuinely believe that serving as a messenger will prove to be precisely the kind of vocation for which I was created." And as the first stars began to emerge in the rapidly darkening sky above Mount Selene, both mother and son harboured a shared conviction that this nascent chapter in Hermes's life was destined to be replete with precisely the sort of adventures that would most effectively harness his truly remarkable and burgeoning gifts. Merely a single day after his inaugural official appointment as the revered divine messenger, young Hermes was already beginning to ascertain that the demands of the position entailed a considerably greater amount of terrestrial locomotion than he had initially anticipated. Oh, he possessed the ability to take flight whenever circumstances necessitated it. However, Zeus had meticulously elucidated that a significant portion of a messenger's work mandated both patience and meticulous observation, which inherently implied travelling at ground level and dedicating ample time to discern details that might prove to be of crucial importance. On this particular morning, Hermes was diligently making his descent along the verdant slopes of Mount Selene, orienting himself toward the distant town of Pylos. His current directive was to deliver a message from the goddess Demeter to a local farmer, conveying vital information regarding the optimal season for the planting of his wheat. It was a pleasant, straightforward assignment, precisely the kind of task Zeus typically entrusted to nascent messengers to facilitate their comfortable acclimatization to their duties. The winding path meandered through fragrant groves of ancient olive trees and vibrant patches of wild herbs, and Hermes was thoroughly relishing the walk. His winged sandals imparted an effortless lightness to each step, and his brand-new hat provided perfect shade, effectively shielding his eyes from the morning sun. Every so often he would pause to scrutinize something that piqued his interest. A particularly vibrant flower, an unusually sculpted rock formation, or a diligent bird constructing its nest within the branches of an olive tree. It was during one such contemplative pause that Hermes made a momentous discovery, an event that would irrevocably alter the course of musical history. He had temporarily halted near a diminutive stream, intending to quench his thirst, when he discerned a slow, deliberate movement across the path directly ahead of him. It was a tortoise, an ancient-looking creature with a shell adorned with exquisite patterns, meticulously making its way toward the stream with the characteristic unhurried dignity for which tortoises are renowned. Now, most individuals would have simply circumvented the creature and continued on their journey, but Hermes possessed a mind that instinctively perceived latent possibilities in every detail. And as he observed the tortoise's measured, steady progress, his thoughts naturally gravitated toward the creature's remarkable shell. It was almost perfectly hemispherical, possessing a natural concavity that produced a faint resonance when the tortoise shifted. The sound was exceedingly subtle, yet Hermes's exceptionally keen ears apprehended it instantly. A nascent idea began to coalesce within his ingenious mind. Hermes had always harboured a profound fascination with sounds and the art of music. Even in his remarkably brief existence, he had already observed that disparate materials yielded distinct acoustical properties when subjected to striking, plucking, or being blown through. He had engaged in rudimentary experimentation, fashioning whistles from slender reeds, rudimentary drums from hollowed logs, and simple rattles from desiccated seed pods. However, he had never quite succeeded in fabricating an instrument capable of producing the intricate, melodious music that occasionally resonated within the confines of his vivid imagination. Gazing intently at the tortoise's shell, Hermes suddenly apprehended the definitive resolution to his long-standing creative conundrum. Now, before any undue concern arises regarding the fate of the tortoise, it is imperative to understand that this particular venerable creature had already endured for several centuries and had quite recently reached a natural decision that it was time to transition to whatever subsequent phase awaited it in a tortoise's cycle of existence. In point of fact, the tortoise appeared almost content when Hermes gently approached and articulated his inventive concept. It was as if the ancient being found satisfaction in the knowledge that its beautifully wrought shell would be transformed into an integral component of something that would, in turn, bestow joy upon others. Hermes proceeded with utmost care and profound respect throughout the process, and upon its completion he possessed a flawless bowl meticulously crafted from the tortoise's shell. However, this was merely the initial stage of his elaborate design. Subsequently, Hermes required strings for his nascent creation. This presented a more formidable challenge, but fortuitously his gaze fell upon a small herd of cattle grazing peacefully in the vicinity. These were not divine bovines, such as those belonging to Apollo, but rather ordinary livestock owned by a local farmer. Hermes approached the farmer and lucidly explained his ambitious project. "I am endeavouring to construct a musical instrument," he conveyed to the man, "and I require some sinew to fashion its strings. Would you be amenable to exchanging some cattle sinew for a divine blessing upon your herd?" The farmer regarded this youthful stranger with his distinctive hat and winged sandals, and an inexplicable intuition informed him that this was no commonplace request emanating from an ordinary individual. "What specific kind of blessing?" he inquired with a degree of circumspection. "Your cattle shall never become lost," Hermes solemnly pledged. "Irrespective of how far they might stray, they will invariably find their way back to their homes safely." This proposition struck the farmer as an equitable exchange. given his perpetual anxiety concerning his animals wandering too far from the security of the farm, he willingly furnished Hermes with several elongated strips of sinew, and in return Hermes gently touched the forehead of each cow, bestowing upon them an unerring, innate sense of direction. With both his shell and his newly acquired strings in hand, Hermes sought out a comfortable repose beneath the shade of an olive tree, and commenced the intricate task of assembling his instrument. He meticulously stretched the strips of sinew across the opening of the shell, carefully adjusting their tension until each individual string, when plucked, produced a clear and resonant musical note. He fashioned a total of 7 strings, tuning them with precision to create a harmonious scale that was utterly pleasing to his discerning ear. Yet Hermes was not quite finished. The instrument required an additional element to facilitate a musician's proper grip and to enable the precise positioning of their hands for playing. Hermes ingeniously resolved this practical dilemma by attaching 2 gracefully curved pieces of polished wood to either side of the shell, thereby creating what would later be universally recognized as the arms of the lyre. Upon the culmination of his ingenious endeavor, Hermes found himself holding an object utterly unprecedented in the annals of global existence. He tentatively caressed a single string, a subtle smile gracing his lips as a pure, mellifluous tone resonated forth. Subsequently, he ventured to strum an ensemble of strings, experiencing profound delight at the opulent, interwoven harmony that emerged. For the ensuing 60 minutes, Hermes remained ensconced beneath the ancient olive tree, diligently acquainting himself with the nuances of his novel musical apparatus. He discerned that distinct arrangements of the strings were capable of evoking a spectrum of emotional states. Certain combinations manifested as ebullient and animated, while others conveyed a profound sense of tranquility and solace. Some melodies conjured vivid imagery of the sun's ascent over towering mountain peaks, whereas others brought to mind the gentle patter of rain upon verdant foliage. As his fingers danced across the strings, Hermes commenced to vocalize softly, spontaneously crafting lyrical narratives to complement the enchanting melodies that emanated from his lyre. His impromptu verses recounted his early morning peregrination, acknowledged the humble tortoise that had generously contributed its carapace, referenced the farmer's grazing livestock, the steadfast olive trees and the crystalline brook where he had paused for refreshment. The exquisite interplay between the lyre's resonant music and his own melodious voice fashioned an auditory tapestry so captivating that local avifauna began to congregate in the branches overhead, drawn by the irresistible allure of his performance. It was precisely during this period of profound musical immersion that Apollo made his appearance. Apollo, the revered deity of music and poetic verse, had been traversing the vicinity, attending to his own divine responsibilities. Upon encountering a symphony of sounds unlike anything he had ever previously encountered, his inherent nature as the patron of harmonious arts compelled him to investigate its source. What he discovered was the youthful Hermes, seated serenely beneath an olive tree, engaged in playing an instrument entirely foreign to Apollo's experience, all while singing with an intrinsic musicality that was undeniably impressive. Apollo remained at the periphery of the olive grove for a considerable duration, listening in a state of utter astonishment. The musical execution was technically impeccable. The instrument itself was flawlessly calibrated, and Hermes's performance exhibited an intuitive grasp of harmonic and rhythmic principles, a mastery that typically necessitated years of dedicated cultivation. Yet, beyond its technical brilliance, the music possessed an inherent emotional depth that profoundly resonated within Apollo's divine heart. It was imbued with a joyous spirit devoid of any frivolousness, intricate in its composition without descending into pretension, and beautiful in a manner that felt utterly organic and unforced. As Hermes concluded his heartfelt song and became aware of Apollo's proximity, he offered a warm smile and a cheerful wave. "Greetings, brother," he called out, his voice carrying easily through the air. "Would you care to experience the sound of my newly crafted instrument?" Apollo advanced with deliberate steps, his gaze intently fixed upon the lyre cradled in Hermes's hands. "What precisely is that?" he inquired, his tone imbued with unfeigned curiosity. "I have chosen to name it a lyre," Hermes elucidated, presenting the instrument for Apollo's closer inspection. "I fashioned it from the shell of a tortoise, supplemented by sinews harvested from cattle, and meticulously carved fragments of olive wood. Pray, listen to this." Hermes then rendered a brief, exquisitely sweet melody that seemed to encapsulate the very essence of a tranquil morning in the ancient Hellenic world. Apollo listened with the rapt, discerning attention characteristic of a true connoisseur of music, and as the final notes faded, he slowly shook his head, lost in profound wonder. "That is truly extraordinary," Apollo declared. "I have never before encountered anything quite like it. The sound possesses such pristine purity, such impeccable balance, and the manner in which you play it suggests years of dedicated practice." "It is not unduly challenging," Hermes responded, with a touch of modesty. "Once one comprehends the symbiotic interplay of the strings, the music almost seems to manifest itself. Would you perhaps care to attempt it?" Apollo accepted the lyre with a reverence befitting someone entrusted with a priceless artifact. He carefully plucked each individual string, meticulously analyzing the tone and pitch of every note. Subsequently, he ventured to strum several strings in unison, and was utterly captivated by the rich, intricate harmonies that arose. For the ensuing minutes, Apollo immersed himself in experimentation with the instrument, and it swiftly became apparent that he possessed an inherent aptitude for playing it. His extensive background in musical training enabled him to immediately grasp the lyre's boundless possibilities, and before long he was weaving intricate melodies that compelled even Hermes to pause and listen in open admiration. "This is absolutely incredible," Apollo exclaimed, his voice brimming with unbridled excitement. "This instrument, it is precisely what I have been seeking. For years I have striven to discover a means of creating music that could rival the sublime beauty of poetry, and this lyre now renders that aspiration attainable." Hermes observed his brother's burgeoning enthusiasm with an increasing sense of gratification. It was unequivocally clear that Apollo appreciated the lyre in a manner that Hermes himself, while talented, could not entirely emulate. While Hermes certainly derived pleasure from music and possessed a natural aptitude for it, Apollo was undeniably consumed by a profound passion. Music, for Apollo, transcended mere activity. It constituted an intrinsic and indispensable facet of his very being. "You know," Hermes remarked thoughtfully, "I believe this lyre would find greater contentment with you than with me." Apollo, startled, momentarily diverted his gaze from the instrument. "What do you mean by that?" Hermes clarified. "I crafted it primarily out of a profound curiosity regarding the mechanics of sound, and I am indeed pleased with the outcome. It proved to be an engaging project, and I acquired a wealth of knowledge. However, you are the divine patron of music. You possess an innate comprehension of this instrument's true potential, and you possess the capability to make it sing in ways I could never achieve." Apollo was profoundly moved by his brother's magnanimous gesture. "Are you truly certain?" he inquired. "You have brought into existence something entirely novel here. This lyre is unequivocally your invention." "I am quite certain," Hermes affirmed with a genial smile. "Furthermore, I still recall the unfortunate incident involving the cattle. I never offered a proper apology for that transgression, and I believe this might serve as an appropriate gesture of atonement." Apollo chuckled softly and tenderly cradled the lyre in his arms. "Consider it entirely expunged from memory," he declared. "This represents the most extraordinary gift I have ever been fortunate enough to receive." And thus, the world's inaugural lyre became Apollo's cherished possession. Consequently, Apollo garnered renown throughout the entirety of ancient Greece, not only as the supreme master of the lyre, but also as the venerable god of music and poetry. Yet, he never once forgot that it was his exceptionally clever younger brother who had conceived and fashioned the instrument in the first place. Many years hence, whenever Apollo performed upon the lyre at grand festivals and celebratory gatherings, he invariably recounted the captivating narrative of how Hermes had ingeniously created the instrument from a tortoise shell, bovine sinew and olive wood, during a seemingly routine morning excursion. This narrative achieved widespread acclaim across Greece, ensuring that Hermes became celebrated not merely as the swift messenger god, but also as the brilliant inventor of one of the world's most exquisitely beautiful musical instruments. As for Hermes himself, he continued his journey towards Pylos that very day, a cheerful whistle accompanying his steps. He had embarked upon the morning with the straightforward objective of delivering a simple message, and he was concluding it with the immense satisfaction of having brought forth something destined to impart joy to countless generations. It was precisely this kind of unforeseen adventure that rendered his divine role as messenger so endlessly fascinating. And should one listen attentively on a serene evening, one might yet discern the ethereal, distant strains of Apollo's lyre, wafting across the rolling hills of Greece, performing melodies that first blossomed in the inventive mind of young Hermes on a tranquil morning eons ago. Following the triumph of his lyre-crafting escapade, Hermes found himself entrusted with an escalating series of increasingly momentous assignments from the venerable Zeus. No longer was his purview confined to the mere conveyance of rudimentary messages to agrarian folk concerning optimal crop schedules or the gentle admonishment of shepherds regarding their requisite offerings at local sanctuaries. Instead, Zeus now reposed his confidence in Hermes for communications capable of swaying the destinies of entire city-states, influencing the very outcomes of protracted conflicts, and shaping the intricate relationships between the pantheon of gods and the realm of mortals. It was upon a crisp autumn morning that Hermes received what would ultimately prove to be one of his most formidable assignments to date. He had been summoned to the magnificent great hall of Mount Olympus the august domain where Zeus presided amidst colossal marble columns that ascended majestically into the swirling clouds and ethereal mists. The hall invariably presented an impressive spectacle, but on this particular day it appeared exceptionally resplendent, with streams of golden light pouring through its grand apertures and the very atmosphere shimmering with an intensity of divine energy that could instill a sense of awe even in other deities. Zeus occupied his majestic throne, which had been meticulously carved from a single gargantuan sapphire and adorned with intricate depictions of soaring eagles and potent lightning bolts. Yet, despite the awe-inspiring grandeur of his surroundings, his countenance betrayed a discernible disquiet, and Hermes immediately apprehended that a matter of grave import was unfolding. "Hermes," Zeus intoned, his voice resonating with a slight echo within the expansive hall, "I possess a message that requires delivery to the esteemed city of Thebes, but this will not be a routine conveyance. The message pertains to a prophecy, and prophecies, as you are undoubtedly aware, can be exceedingly intricate affairs." Hermes offered a solemn nod. His nascent experience as a divine courier had already taught him that prophecies ranked among the most challenging communications to manage. Unlike unambiguous commands or straightforward informational dispatches, prophecies necessitated delivery with absolute precision at the exact opportune moment to the precisely designated individual and in the flawlessly appropriate manner. Any misstep in these critical details could result in the prophecy being misinterpreted, summarily disregarded, or indeed could even precipitate an outcome diametrically opposed to its intended purpose. "The prophecy concerns King Laius of Thebes," Zeus continued, his tone grave. "He is, by all accounts, an upright man and a just sovereign, yet he has recently undertaken certain decisions that are poised to precipitate considerable tribulation for his kingdom. The prophecy is designed to serve as a solemn warning, affording him an opportunity to alter his current trajectory." Zeus then extended a scroll to Hermes which appeared to emanate a subtle, intrinsic luminosity. "The message demands personal delivery to Laius. However, herein lies the formidable challenge. He is currently immersed in a grand festival, celebrating his recent military triumph. He is encompassed by jubilant citizens, distinguished visiting dignitaries, and fellow monarchs from neighbouring city-states. He is therefore in no frame of mind to receive ominous forewarnings about potential future adversities. The divine courier, Hermes, perused the ancient parchment with a contemplative air, acknowledging the intricate challenge before him. "I must discern a method to compel him to regard this prophecy with the gravity it demands, notwithstanding his current flush of self-assurance and monumental triumphs." Zeus, the sovereign of Olympus, affirmed with a decisive nod, "Precisely." And this intervention brooks no delay. The longer he postpones heeding this premonition, the more arduous it will become for him to circumvent the tribulations foretold within the prophetic verses. Hermes carefully stowed the luminous scroll within the confines of his satchel, a vessel for divine tidings, and prepared for his imminent journey towards the storied city of Thebes. Yet, as he traversed the expanse of the Hellenic landscape, his intellect grappled intently with the conundrum of how best to engage King Laius. A straightforward appearance amidst the ebullient festivities unilaterally declaring a delivered prophecy would in all likelihood prove entirely ineffectual. Monarchs basking in the glory of military conquests typically evinced little inclination to halt their revelries for the unwelcome prospect of impending misfortunes. Upon his aerial descent over the venerable city of Thebes, Hermes observed that the celebratory carnival was, without question, in its most exuberant phase. The thoroughfares were adorned with a profusion of vibrant pennants and intricately woven floral garlands lending an air of festive splendour. Citizens swayed in joyous dances within the public squares, their movements reflecting the pervasive mirth. Everywhere, itinerant vendors hawked an array of special culinary delights crafted for the occasion, contributing to an atmosphere saturated with unbridled joy and collective jubilation. At the very heart of the metropolis, the royal edifice blazed with the soft glow of hundreds of oil lamps, and Hermes could distinctly perceive the harmonious strains of music and peals of hearty laughter wafting upwards from the bustling courtyard. With practised stealth, Hermes alighted upon a rooftop in proximity to the palace, dedicating a period of observation to the spirited celebration unfolding below. King Laius was readily discernible, presiding at the principal table within the palace courtyard, a golden diadem gracing his brow. He exuded an unfeigned contentment as he surveyed his populace engrossed in their festivities. It was evident that he enjoyed widespread acclaim, and his subjects appeared to harbour genuine affection for him. This realization was encouraging. It suggested a monarch intrinsically concerned with the welfare of his people, potentially amenable to a divine caution, provided it was imparted with appropriate finesse. However, Hermes also noted the king's constant encirclement by a retinue of astute advisers, seasoned generals, and esteemed visiting dignitaries, each seemingly vying for a fragment of his attention. Every individual sought to proffer felicitations on his recent triumph, present lavish gifts, or engage in discussions concerning prospective alliances and lucrative trade compacts. Securing a private audience with Laius, under these circumstances, promised to be an endeavour of formidable impossibility. As Hermes continued his vigilant watch over the unfolding celebratory scene, a nascent strategy began to coalesce within his astute mind. It was an audacious gambit, one that would necessitate impeccable timing and execution, yet it held the tantalizing promise of success. Hermes descended gracefully to the city's marketplace, a locale largely deserted due to the universal attendance at the grand festival. He located a stall specializing in earthenware and appropriated a modest clay chalice and a diminutive oil lamp. Armed with these unassuming props, he then made his way towards the palace. Instead of attempting entry through the heavily guarded main portals, he sought out a discreet side entrance, typically utilized by the palace staff transporting provisions and libations from the extensive kitchens. Adopting the guise of a youthful servant laden with refreshments, Hermes navigated the labyrinthine palace corridors, steadily progressing towards the courtyard. His ingenious design was to seamlessly integrate with the other domestics and patiently await the optimal juncture to approach the reigning monarch. That propitious moment materialized approximately an hour later, when King Laius momentarily withdrew from the primary revelry to visit a secluded shrine nestled within a tranquil corner of the palace garden. The hallowed sanctuary was consecrated to Athena, the sagacious goddess of wisdom, and Laius had, it appeared, chosen this private interlude to offer a personal votive of gratitude for his recent military ascendancy. Hermes observed as the king kindled incense at the sacred altar, standing in quiet contemplation and prayer for several moments. The conditions were ideal. Laius was entirely unchaperoned, immersed in a reverent state of introspection, and already engaged with thoughts pertaining to divine matters. Hermes advanced with a hushed tread, still clutching his unassuming cup and oil lamp. "Your Majesty," he uttered softly, his voice imbued with deference, "pray forgive this intrusion." Laius pivoted, anticipating the familiar sight of a servant burdened with an inquiry regarding the festival's arrangements. Instead, his gaze fell upon a youthful figure whose mien was paradoxically both unremarkable and profoundly extraordinary. The stranger was clad in plain garments, yet his eyes possessed an inexplicable depth and sagacity that hinted at immense understanding. And a fleeting thought crossed the king's mind. Were those indeed a pair of miniature wings affixed to his sandals? "I bear salutations from the lofty peaks of Mount Olympus," Hermes declared, his tone respectful, yet resonating with an inherent authority, "and a direct communication from Zeus himself." A sudden tremor seized Laius's heart. Messages from the king of the gods were exceedingly rare, and invariably portended matters of profound consequence. He surreptitiously scanned the surrounding garden, ensuring their continued solitude, then offered a silent nod, granting Hermes leave to proceed. Hermes meticulously withdrew the luminescent scroll from his messenger bag, extending it towards the king with a solemn gesture. "Zeus has observed your qualities as a benevolent sovereign and a man who harbours profound solicitude for the welfare of your populace," he articulated. "Consequently, he wishes to forewarn you against a particular course of action you are presently contemplating, one that could precipitate immense sorrow for both your royal person and your cherished kingdom." Laius accepted the parchment, his hands betraying a slight tremor. "What manner of admonition is this?" he inquired, his voice barely above a whisper. The prophecy itself will elucidate all matters," Hermes responded gently, his tone reassuring. "However, Zeus desires you to comprehend that this caution emanates from a place of profound respect for your inherent wisdom and a genuine concern for the enduring happiness of your people. He firmly believes you possess the capacity for judicious decision-making, but only if you are furnished with the entirety of the requisite information." This particular rhetorical strategy proved precisely the correct approach to adopt with King Laius. Far from feeling imperilled or subject to critique, the monarch experienced a profound sense of honour that Zeus held him in such high esteem as to proffer divine counsel. He unrolled the scroll and meticulously absorbed the prophecy's contents. The ancient text warned that Laius was contemplating a consultation with an oracle regarding the prospect of conceiving an heir to his throne, and that if he were to pursue this specific path, the outcome would inevitably usher in tragedy for his immediate family and his entire kingdom. In lieu of this perilous course, the prophecy gently suggested he should instead concentrate his efforts on mentoring one of his deserving nephews to eventually accede to the crown, thereby finding profound fulfillment in being perpetually commemorated as a monarch who bequeathed enduring peace and prosperity to his people. Laius perused the prophecy twice, his mind meticulously weighing its far-reaching implications. It was undeniably true that he had been seriously considering seeking an oracle's guidance concerning the begetting of progeny. His queen Jocasta had long cherished the hope of bearing a child, And as king, Laius felt an undeniable societal and dynastic imperative to produce a direct successor. However, the prophecy unequivocally indicated that this natural desire, while deeply human, would lead to unforeseen and catastrophic difficulties. "This is an arduous counsel to embrace," Laius finally articulated, his voice heavy with the weight of his dilemma. "My subjects anticipate their king will produce offspring capable of inheriting the royal lineage. Your subjects, your majesty, expect their king to render sagacious judgments that safeguard the kingdom's enduring future," Hermes rejoined with quiet conviction. "And Zeus firmly believes that your wisdom constitutes your most formidable asset as a ruler. He trusts implicitly in your capacity to discern the critical distinction between popular expectation and what genuinely serves the highest good for all." Hermes's insightful words provided Laius with a transformative new perspective on his predicament. As king, his fundamental obligation was not merely to conform to prevailing expectations, but rather to consistently act in accordance with what was morally and strategically right. And if Zeus himself, the supreme deity, was issuing a direct warning against a particular course of action, then that divine admonition unequivocally merited the most profound and earnest consideration. "Would you be so kind as to convey a message back to Zeus on my behalf?" Laius inquired, his tone now imbued with a newfound reverence. "Assuredly," Hermes promptly replied. "Inform him that I am deeply appreciative of his divine guidance, and that I shall deliberate meticulously upon the prophecy's solemn warning. While I may not render my definitive decision instantaneously, I pledge that when I do ultimately decide, I shall steadfastly remember that my paramount duty is to vigilantly protect the future prosperity and stability of my kingdom." Hermes acknowledged the king's thoughtful response with an approving nod. "That is precisely the caliber of reply Zeus had anticipated," he affirmed. "Your renown for sagacity, your majesty, is indeed thoroughly merited." As Hermes made preparations for his departure, Laius posed one final query. "How shall I discern if I am making the correct choice?" Hermes offered a gentle smile. "Zeus holds the conviction that truly benevolent rulers possess an innate understanding within their very hearts when their decisions are motivated by the purest intentions. Trust your innermost instincts, and always remember that the most exemplary kings are those who demonstrate an unwavering willingness to subordinate their personal aspirations for the overarching welfare of their people." With this profound counsel, Hermes took his leave, discreetly retracing his steps through the palace corridors and vanishing into the nocturnal shadows. By the time King Laius rejoined his vibrant festival, Hermes was already soaring back towards the celestial heights of Mount Olympus, bearing the monarch's deeply considered response directly to Zeus. Upon Hermes's delivery of Laius's message to Zeus, the venerable king of the gods expressed his profound satisfaction, both with the Theban monarch's judicious response and with Hermes's masterful execution of what had been a challenging assignment. "That was an exceptionally well executed task," Zeus commended his youthful messenger. "You discovered the precise method to approach a king who was in no frame of mind to receive cautionary tidings, and you successfully guided him to comprehend that the prophecy was intended as an aid, not a threat. It was certainly beneficial that he is, in truth, a virtuous king," Hermes humbly responded. Once he grasped that the warning originated from a place of profound respect, He proved entirely receptive to its message. Zeus nodded with a thoughtful mien. That imparts a crucial lesson concerning the role of a messenger, he mused. The manner in which one conveys a message can possess as much significance as the message itself. Individuals are considerably more inclined to heed difficult truths when those truths are presented with an encompassing spirit of kindness and respect. Thus, Hermes assimilated yet another invaluable precept pertaining to his esteemed role as a divine emissary. It was insufficient merely to deliver communications with unimpeachable accuracy. He also needed to cultivate a profound understanding of the individuals receiving those messages, and to adeptly devise strategies to assist them in accepting challenging realities when circumstances demanded it. This burgeoning sagacity was precisely the kind of wisdom that would serve him admirably in the multitude of demanding assignments that lay ahead. As our previous narrative concluded, Hermes had just internalized profound insights regarding the art of conveying difficult messages with both prudence and empathy. However, the ingenious messenger god was on the precipice of discovering that his responsibilities extended far beyond the simple act of transmitting verbal communications between the pantheon and mortals. The very thoroughfares he traversed daily were now, in essence, beckoning for his focused attention and diligent guardianship. Imagine for a moment the ancient thoroughfares of Hellenic lands at dawn. These were not the meticulously engineered stone arteries that the Romans would later construct, but rather serpentine dirt pathways, etched into the landscape by the ceaseless passage of multitudes of bygone eras. Some meticulously traced the contours of venerable trade routes, pathways that merchants had plied for hundreds of years. Others represented more recent passages, hewn by the relentless advance of armies or spontaneously created when an astute individual discerned a swift passage through a rugged mountain defile. On a hazy dawn in early spring, Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods, soared above one such remote alpine road when a scene below drew his discerning gaze. A family found themselves marooned beside their incapacitated conveyance, casting apprehensive glances at the ominous clouds gathering above. Their oxen stood patiently in their yokes, yet it was painfully evident that the wooden wheel had fractured irreparably, defying any hope of simple mending. Hermes descended gracefully nearby, folding his winged sandals and adjusting his traveller's cap to assume the guise of an unassuming pedestrian. The family consisted of an elderly patriarch with benevolent eyes and hands gnarled by toil, his daughter who cradled a slumbering infant, and two young children who clutched their mother's garments in palpable apprehension. "Is your cart giving you trouble?" Hermes inquired with a soft cadence, approaching with the reassuring grin that instilled immediate comfort in unfamiliar encounters. The grandfather responded with a fatigued inclination of his head. "The wheel gave way about a mile back. We are striving to reach my brother's farm before the impending vernal downpours render the thoroughfares impassable." But he indicated with a gesture of profound futility at their disabled transportation. As Hermes meticulously examined their cart, he noticed something that stirred a profound disquiet within him. This was far from the inaugural breakdown he had witnessed on this specific segment of this route. Just in the preceding week he had observed 3 distinct groups of wayfarers grappling with analogous predicaments. The road surface was treacherous and strewn with concealed stones that could inflict severe damage upon wheels and axles. Crucially, there were no cautionary indicators to alert people to the perilous spots, no signposts directing them toward the nearest blacksmith capable of urgent mending. With meticulous application, Hermes employed his celestial powers to fortify the fractured spoke of their wheel and bolster the carriage's central shaft. Yet, as the indebted kin prepared to resume their journey, a nascent concept started to crystallize within the messenger god's fertile mind. "Before you proceed," Hermes uttered with a contemplative air, "would you be amenable to assisting me with a small endeavor? I wish to place a wayfaring monument here, to alert fellow wayfarers about the rough road ahead." The family eagerly assented, and together they chose an appropriate slab of rock from the roadside. Hermes then utilized his caduceus to incise a concise inscription into its surface: "Rough road ahead. Check wheels and axles. Safe repair stop. Blacksmith Alexios, 2 miles south in Gia village." As the family bid their farewells and continued on their journey, Hermes stood beside his newly placed marker stone and felt a profound feeling of gratification. This modest gesture of assistance possessed the potential to avert similar tribulations for future voyages. Yet the nascent thought emerged: why confine this endeavor to a singular marker? Over the following weeks, Hermes initiated a monumental undertaking that would fundamentally transform the experience of passage across Hellenic lands forever. Whenever his crucial messenger duties led him along well-trodden routes, he devoted time to evaluating the myriad difficulties that ordinary people faced when journeying between cities. At perilous alpine defiles where brigands were wont to lurk, Hermes established warning stones that counseled wayfarers to proceed in convoys and suggested safer alternative passages. Near dependable aquifers and conduits, he erected signposts guiding thirsty travellers to potable springs. At perplexing intersections where paths branched in multiple directions, he installed unambiguous wayfinding indicators pointing toward major cities, complete with precise spatial metrics. However, Hermes did not restrict his efforts to simple directional information. His acute perceptive faculties allowed him to discern the more nuanced impediments that rendered travel arduous or perilous. He marked stones that delineated which inns provided reputable hospitality and equitable remuneration, and which merchants could be relied upon for urgent mending of carts and equipment. He identified secure bivouac locations where travellers could spend the night devoid of apprehension and delineated perilous zones to be circumvented after twilight. The marker stones themselves became aesthetic marvels in their own right. Hermes developed a sophisticated iconographic lexicon of simple symbols that even travellers who lacked literacy could readily decipher. An incised chalice denoted potable springs nearby. A miniature domicile represented secure accommodations. A radiant orb signified an optimal site for nocturnal repose under the celestial canopy. Cautionary pictograms elucidated perils such as precipitous escarpments, inundation-susceptible locales, or areas where feral creatures were frequently observed. As tidings of these benevolent waymarkers disseminated throughout Greece, travellers began referring to them fondly as the Hermes stones. But the young god remained unappeased with merely delineating extant perils and provisions. He commenced collaborative endeavours with local communities to actually ameliorate the very thoroughfares themselves. In the bustling town of Corinth, Hermes orchestrated an initiative to remediate treacherous depressions and clear the jagged stones that damaged cartwheels. He demonstrated to the populace the efficacy of collective effort in sustaining the arteries of transit that passed through their territory, explaining that superior roads would attract a greater influx of traders and wayfarers, which would, in turn, redound to the commercial advantage of all. In mountainous regions, Hermes aided villagers in establishing contingency havens furnished with rudimentary provisions for travellers overtaken by abrupt tempests. These were not elaborate edifices, but rather unadorned rock dwellings crowned with impervious coverings containing seasoned kindling and reserves of sustenance like bread and cheese that local people kept supplied in exchange for modest tributes from appreciative voyagers. But perhaps Hermes' singularly ingenious innovation was his resolution to the quandary of jurisdictional demarcation. Contentions frequently emerged when travellers remained uncertain regarding the legal ordinances governing a specific locale, or when traders harboured ambiguity concerning regional fiscal obligations and commercial customs. Collaborating assiduously with chieftains from communities throughout Greece, Hermes instituted a framework of demarcation monuments that accomplished far more than simply indicating where one territory ended and another began. These markers provided comprehensive particulars about local laws, tax rates, market days, and cultural customs that would be crucial for sojourners to comprehend. A characteristic frontier stele might proclaim, "Welcome to Argos territory." Market days, 3rd and 7th day of each week. Tax on trade goods, 1 silver coin per cart. Temple of Hera offers sanctuary to all peaceful travellers. Fresh water and lodging available at the Blue Dolphin Inn, 1 mile ahead on Main Road. These immensely favoured informative boundary stones proved exceptionally popular with both wayfarers and local communities. Visitors appreciated having unambiguous directives about regional regulations and resources, while communities found that the markers mitigated misapprehensions and altercations with unfamiliar individuals traversing their domain. As months passed, Hermes' road improvement project blossomed into an enterprise far exceeding its initial conception. Communities began soliciting his assistance with implementing beacon networks for coastal areas, devising aquatic transit timetables for island travel, and forging urgent intelligence conduits that could disseminate alerts about everything from impending tempests to brigand incursions. The messenger god approached each request with his hallmark ingenuity and meticulous precision. For coastal communities, he conceived Pyrrhic signalling apparatuses that could convey meteorological states and port accessibility to ships approaching from different directions. The signals were uncomplicated, yet efficacious. 1 fire meant safe harbour, 2 fires meant rough weather but harbour open, 3 fires meant harbour closed due to dangerous conditions. For island communities that depended upon maritime shuttle services, Hermes engineered systematic timetables that guaranteed consistent operation, while also furnishing supplementary conveyance in times of crisis. He instituted provisions depots on desolate islets where emergency ferries could stop for potable liquids and sustenance during arduous voyages. Of paramount significance, Hermes created an interconnected intelligence web linking every one of his roadside markers throughout Greece. By leveraging these steles as communal bulletin boards, communities could exchange intelligence regarding thoroughfare states, meteorological perils, and perilous security situations that could impact voyagers. If marauders were sighted near a particular mountain pass, the proximate settlement could inscribe a cautionary dispatch at their local Hermes stone, and travellers would be apprised of the peril prior to venturing into the precarious zone. If a span was compromised by inundation, communities could affix alerts at pertinent upstream indicators, affording wayfarers an opportunity to identify alternative passages prior to encountering the unnavigable traverse. This communication network demonstrated such immense utility that it ultimately evolved into a preeminent intelligence infrastructure in classical antiquity. Communities began using the Hermes stones beyond mere interaction with wayfarers to disseminate crucial intelligence among themselves about agricultural prospects, commercial ventures, governmental shifts, and atmospheric trends. The system cultivated an ethos of collaboration and reciprocal aid that fortified the ties among disparate settlements throughout Greece. Villages that had hitherto isolated themselves commenced cooperative endeavours to address shared challenges. Commerce burgeoned as traders perceived greater security in travelling longer distances. Intellectual and artistic interchange prospered as people felt more assured in undertaking pilgrimages to remote observances and festivities. As Hermes traversed the Hellenic landscape on his customary career assignments, he bore witness to the beneficial transformations his ambitious road improvement project had engendered. The pathways, once rugged and treacherous, were now notably more even and secure, offering a smoother journey for all. Strategically placed marker stones provided invaluable navigational assistance at every turn, ensuring travellers rarely strayed from their intended routes. Consequently, communities found themselves more interlinked and mutually supportive, fostering a spirit of cooperation across the land. Most profoundly, ordinary citizens could now embark on journeys with a newfound sense of security, confident that aid and crucial information were readily accessible whenever their needs arose. Zeus, observing these developments, felt an increasing esteem for his young messenger's proactive spirit and sagacious foresight. When he beckoned Hermes to the celestial heights of Mount Olympus to confer upon the burgeoning road network, his commendation was heartfelt and sincere. "You've achieved a truly extraordinary feat," Zeus declared, as they strolled together through the divine gardens of Olympus, the air fragrant with ambrosial blossoms. What commenced as an uncomplicated benevolent gesture toward one solitary stranded family has, through your diligent effort, evolved into an expansive framework that is demonstrably enhancing the existence of people throughout our entire realm. Hermes, while experiencing a profound contentment at his paternal commendation, was already consumed by thoughts of how to further refine and broaden the system. "I've been contemplating whether we might amplify the guidance system to integrate data concerning climatic shifts," he mused aloud, his gaze distant, considering the possibilities. Agriculturists, for instance, could share intelligence about the optimal periods for sowing and reaping in disparate geographical regions. Similarly, mariners could forewarn their colleagues about seasonal atmospheric currents and tempestuous hazards, thereby safeguarding their voyages. Zeus responded with a knowing smile, a testament to his son's boundless ingenuity and tireless drive. "I believe," he remarked, his voice resonating with paternal pride, "that you are destined to keep uncovering novel methods to assist humanity for the entirety of your tenure as our divine envoy." And indeed, as dusk descends over the tranquil thoroughfares of ancient Greece, one might well imagine Hermes still traversing those paths, diligently inspecting his navigational cairns, offering succour to waylaid voyagers, and perpetually conceiving of fresh innovations to render the journey a little more secure and agreeable for everyone who shares the road with him. The resounding triumph of Hermes' extensive road improvement project had an unanticipated repercussion, one that the youthful messenger god had entirely failed to anticipate. As travel across the Hellenic domain became markedly more secure and reliably consistent, a remarkable phenomenon commenced within the bustling marketplaces of every town and city. Commerce was burgeoning with unparalleled vigour. Merchants who had previously been hesitant to undertake arduous expeditions across perilous routes were now commuting frequently between distant urban centres. Farmers, who had once distributed their agricultural yields solely within their immediate hamlets, were discovering that they could convey their produce to larger emporia, where it fetched superior valuations. Artisans and craftspeople, too, were securing patrons for their exquisite work in places they had previously deemed unattainable. It was on a particularly hectic dawn in the grand Athenian agora that Hermes first discerned how profoundly his infrastructural enhancements had transformed the entire sphere of trade. He had paused at the public square to deliver a message from the goddess Athena to one of her esteemed priests. Yet, as he ambled through the vibrant emporium, he could not help but notice how much more animated and variegated it had become. Vendors from as far away as the island of Crete were proudly displaying unfamiliar commodities alongside indigenous Attic wares. A skilled pottery maker from Corinth was meticulously showcasing his artisanal methods to a throng of captivated patrons who had never before witnessed such fine craftsmanship. Farmers from the rugged mountain regions were exchanging their dairy and fleece for pressed olives and fermented grapes from the fertile coastal areas. The atmosphere hummed with discourse, a symphony of numerous distinct linguistic variations, as people from across the Greek world engaged in commercial transactions collectively. However, as Hermes continued to observe the vibrant commercial bustle, his keen perception began to discern emerging difficulties arising in tandem with this burgeoning affluence. A segment of the traders, regrettably, lacked the requisite integrity. Some unscrupulous individuals were employing inaccurate scales to defraud their patrons. Others were making inflated assertions about the merit or provenance of their wares. A few were shamelessly exploiting clientele who were unacquainted with equitable commercial valuations. Hermes watched with increasing apprehension as an aged agriculturist from a secluded highland hamlet was unmistakably being defrauded by a textile vendor who was demanding a threefold premium for an equitable cost for a simple woolen garment. The farmer, who evidently made infrequent excursions to major emporia, lacked any means of discerning that he was being exorbitantly priced. Instantly and decisively, Hermes drew near the agriculturist and initiated an amiable dialogue. "That is a truly beautiful garment," he remarked, scrutinizing the vendor's merchandise with an expert eye. "Though I must confess I just observed precisely similar fleece for sale at 50% of the cost, a mere 2 booths away." The dishonest merchant scowled fiercely at Hermes, but was unable to dispute the veracity of the claim. The farmer, expressing profound gratitude to his benevolent new-found acquaintance, proceeded to seek out a vendor of greater integrity, while the fraudulent vendor was left to reconsider his commercial conduct. As Hermes proceeded through the bustling agora, he found himself interposing himself in comparable predicaments on multiple subsequent occasions. He helped a young woman from the islands avert purchasing substandard olive oil that had been adulterated with less costly alternatives. He cautioned a ceramic purchaser about fissures that had been artfully concealed with resinous compounds and pigments. He directed a fleece vendor toward clientele who were proffering equitable rates for superior commodities. By the conclusion of the morning, Hermes had successfully averted multiple occurrences of deceit and assisted many reputable merchants in securing favorable clientele for their products. Yet, through these experiences, he had also developed a profound insight into the crucial role of ethical conduct in the flourishing of Hellenic trade. When unscrupulous traders defrauded their patrons, tales of their deceitful conduct rapidly disseminated through the extensive web of voyagers and vendors. This tarnished not merely their personal standing, but the standing of their collective settlements. People consequently became hesitant to engage in transactions with anyone from locales known for sheltering fraudulent vendors. Conversely, traders renowned for integrity and superior merchandise drew clientele from far-flung locales. Their triumph engendered affluence not only for themselves, but also for their whole societies. As expanded commerce generated additional employment, enhanced civic amenities and widespread communal well-being, Hermes realized that fostering ethical commercial practices was more than merely assisting solitary patrons in evading exploitation. It was, in fact, imperative for the sustained expansion and welfare of the entirety of Hellenic commerce. Over the subsequent quarter-year periods, Hermes devised an all-encompassing strategy for upholding equitable trade across the Hellenic domain. He commenced by instituting a framework for trader accreditation that assisted reputable vendors in cultivating renown for dependability and excellence. Collaborating with seasoned merchants who were distinguished by their probity, Hermes forged an interconnected web of testimonials and endorsements. Emergent traders might attain accreditation by exhibiting their rectitude and superior standards to veteran commercial practitioners, who would then endorse them to patrons in disparate urban centers. The accreditation mechanism functioned reciprocally. Clientele, too, could garner renown as equitable and trustworthy commercial associates by settling their obligations without delay, engaging with vendors courteously, and conducting their personal commercial dealings with probity. Hermes integrated this commercial consortium into his established framework of wayfinding cairns. Hermes markers now conveyed intelligence about accredited upright traders in proximate settlements, alongside admonitions regarding vendors implicated in deceptive dealings. However, Hermes did not merely confine himself to delineating reputable and disreputable merchants. He began diligently striving to assist traders in refining their commercial methodologies and broadening their enterprises. For modest agriculturists and artisanal workers who were daunted by the intricacies of expansive emporia, Hermes convened instructional workshops focused on equitable valuation, benchmarks of excellence, and efficacious promotional strategies. He taught them how to display their wares appealingly, how to bargain honorably with patrons, and how to forge enduring commercial associations based on reciprocal esteem and confidence. For seasoned traders who wished to venture into novel commercial domains, Hermes furnished comprehensive intelligence about indigenous traditions, consumer inclinations, and commercial landscapes in diverse geographical locales. He elucidated which commodities enjoyed significant popularity in specific localities, the valuations patrons typically expected to tender, and how to engage with prospective commercial associates courteously and respectfully. Crucially, above all else, Hermes worked to unify systems of mass and volume throughout the entire Hellenic commercial web. One of the primary progenitors of perplexity and contention in antique trade was the fact that disparate palays employed distinct methodologies for apportioning cereals, vintages, textiles, and sundry commodities. For instance, a measure of grain in the Attic capital could signify a markedly distinct volume from its Spartan counterpart, inevitably engendering misapprehensions and disagreements when traders from diverse urban centres sought to engage in mutual commerce. Similarly, quantifications for vintages, oleaginous liquids, fabrics, and valuable minerals fluctuated by locale, rendering it challenging for vendors to ascertain comparative costs and compute equitable transactions. Engaging with unwavering forbearance with civic authorities across the Hellenic lands, Hermes conceived a unified methodology of weights and measures that could be used uniformly throughout every emporium. He instituted authoritative benchmarks for mass in principal commercial hubs and instructed regional administrators to confirm that vendor balances and quantities were precise. The endeavour for uniformity proved more intricate than initially perceivable. Various settlements had adhered to their ancestral metrological frameworks for countless epochs, and a considerable populace evinced an aversion to altering accustomed procedures. Hermes was thus compelled to illustrate the advantages of standardization with meticulousness and tact. He illustrated to traders how unified quantifications would facilitate greater ease in conducting commerce with associates from remote urban areas. He articulated to civic heads how uniform criteria would draw an increased number of vendors to their markets, thereby bolstering regional affluence. Paramountly, he evinced how uniformity would mitigate disagreements and misapprehensions that could imperil commercial bonds. As freshly implemented commercial benchmarks were progressively embraced and integrated throughout Greece, trade operations became significantly streamlined and yielded greater returns for all participants. Merchants found it simpler to ascertain expenditures and selling rates when engaging with associates from diverse geographical areas, whether exchanging olive oil for timber or pottery for textiles. Patrons, in turn, gained the assurance to scrutinize and evaluate products and services from various vendors with confidence, knowing that a measure of wine in one city was identical to another. Consequently, contentions stemming from inconsistent metrics significantly diminished, and commercial affiliations blossomed into more steadfast and reliable partnerships, fostering an environment of mutual confidence. Beyond these foundational improvements, Hermes further instituted a sophisticated mechanism for addressing mercantile disagreements when they inevitably arose. To circumvent the destructive potential of conflicts spiraling into protracted, expensive judicial contests or even aggressive physical altercations, he meticulously curated a cadre of seasoned traders designated to function as impartial arbiters. These arbiters were selected not only for their unimpeachable standing for equity, but also for their profound grasp of intricate commercial customs and procedures. Upon the emergence of a contention, both involved entities could consensually commit to presenting their respective arguments before an appointed arbitrator, who would diligently consider all perspectives before articulating an equitable resolution. Though participation in this arbitration framework was entirely volitional, it garnered immense favour due to its superior expediency, cost-effectiveness, and pragmatic utility when compared against the ponderous nature of conventional legal processes. Crucially, this innovative approach enabled commercial associates to reconcile their disagreements without irrevocably damaging their vital professional connections. With the sustained burgeoning of Hellenic commerce meticulously overseen by Hermes' sagacious direction, the divine herald observed an extraordinary phenomenon unfolding. The burgeoning volume of mercantile activity was not merely augmenting the fortunes of solitary traders, rather, it was engendering widespread affluence and opening avenues of advancement across the entire fabric of Greek civilization. Agriculturalists, for instance, were uncovering novel outlets for their harvests, selling surplus grain or specialized olives to distant city-states, and this impetus spurred them to refine their cultivation methods and amplify their output. Artisans, similarly, were encountering eager patrons for bespoke creations they had previously been unable to circulate within their immediate vicinities, perhaps intricate pottery or unique metalwork, and this newfound demand galvanized them to cultivate fresh proficiencies and conceive more groundbreaking aesthetics. Even those segments of the populace not directly engaged in commercial endeavors reaped advantages from the significantly expanded assortment of commodities accessible within their community marketplaces. The enhanced network of thoroughfares and the dependable nature of commercial operations were concurrently fostering a profound and unparalleled cross-pollination of cultural elements. Individuals undertaking journeys for mercantile purposes returned laden not just with goods, but with novel concepts, refined methodologies, and broadened outlooks gleaned from the diverse locales they frequented. Communal festivities and ritualistic celebrations assumed greater grandeur and intricacy, a direct consequence of communities acquiring previously unattainable resources and merchandise from far-off territories. The dissemination of erudition and pioneering advancements accelerated remarkably, propelled by the movements of academics, creative practitioners, and ingenious minds traversing the progressively secure and clearly delineated arteries of trade. The sovereign deity, Zeus, regarded these multifaceted advancements with profound paternal pride, recognizing the monumental accomplishments of his herald son. Upon summoning Hermes to deliberate upon the triumphs born from these mercantile enhancements, the Olympian king's contentment was unmistakably palpable. From their vantage point on a lofty balcony, gazing down upon the bustling and flourishing agora of Athens, Zeus proclaimed, "You have forged an endeavour that vastly transcends any vision I held when I first designated you as our celestial envoy." He continued, "Your impact extends beyond mere commercial refinement. You have been instrumental in cultivating a Hellenic civilization that is more interconnected, more affluent, and fundamentally more collaborative." Hermes, for his part, experienced a profound sense of gratification at his father's commendation. Yet, ever forward-thinking, his mind was already engaged in conceiving novel methodologies to bolster and further elevate Hellenic trade. He pondered aloud, "I have been contemplating the institution of periodic trade festivals." He envisioned assemblages where traders from the entirety of the Greek realm could convene to exhibit their finest wares, exchange innovative concepts, and forge fresh commercial alliances. Zeus offered a warm smile, acknowledging his son's boundless inventiveness and unwavering drive. "That," he affirmed, "is an exceptional proposition." and I fully anticipate that you will devise means to render these festivals not merely triumphant, but truly fabled. Thus, as twilight descends upon the bustling emporiums of ancient Hellas, one might conceivably envision Hermes continuing his silent perambulations amidst the vendors and patrons, subtly guaranteeing the integrity of each exchange, the probity of every merchant, and the equitable recompense for every customer's expenditure. His tireless endeavours had fundamentally reshaped not solely the practice of trade, but the very essence and ethos of Greek civilization itself, forging bonds and fostering an era of flourishing abundance destined to persist for countless future generations. Although Hermes had cultivated an esteemed standing across the Hellenic world as a divine patron of wayfarers and an unwavering sentinel of upright mercantile dealings, there existed a distinct facet of his temperament, one that manifested in more subdued circumstances his indomitable penchant for ingenious stratagems and linguistic dexterity. Crucially, this was not the malevolent deviousness of an entity delighting in inflicting detriment or distress. Rather, Hermes artfully deployed his trickster faculties to impart profound instruction, to temper the hubris of the haughty, and occasionally to inject a touch of unforeseen merriment into the mundane rhythm of daily life. During the course of one of his customary divine dispatches, Hermes chanced upon an incident that served as a consummate demonstration of his singular methodology for engaging with challenging personalities. His mission had taken him to the affluent polis of Aethel, where he was tasked with conveying a communique from Poseidon concerning imminent meteorological phenomena, poised to impact maritime endeavours and oceanic transit. The specific recipient of this divine intelligence was Captain Nicomedes, the appointed harbour master responsible for orchestrating the operations of Aethel's extensive fishing flotilla. However, upon his arrival at the bustling port, Hermes swiftly ascertained that Nicomedes bore the distinction of being arguably the most ostentatious and conceited functionary throughout the entirety of Greece. Within the grand confines of the Port Authority edifice, Hermes located the harbour master presiding as if holding court, encircled by a retinue of junior functionaries who afforded his every utterance an air of excessive deference and concentration. Nicomedes himself was a figure of considerable bulk, distinguished by a meticulously coiffed, elaborately curled beard, draped in sumptuous raiment, and possessing a conversational style that unequivocally conveyed his conviction of superior significance compared to all others present. As Hermes made his entrance, Nicomedes was in the midst of pontificating. The fundamental deficiency prevalent among contemporary fishermen, he pronounced, lies in their dearth of sagacity and practical knowledge, which springs from a genuine comprehension of oceanic matters. He continued, "In my youth, a period I concede was several decades past, mariners held the expertise of their elders in high regard, and faithfully adhered to the counsel offered by those of us privy to the more profound arcana of navigation and maritime law." Hermes absorbed this self-important disquisition with an escalating sense of mirth. It became palpably evident that Nicomedes harboured a profound affection for the timbre of his own voice, seizing every conceivable moment to trumpet his purported proficiency and dominion. Advancing with an air of appropriate deference, Hermes interjected, "Pardon me, esteemed sir. I bear a momentous communique destined for Harbour Master Nicomedes, emanating directly from the venerable Poseidon himself." Nicomedes assumed a posture of heightened self-importance, signalling to the junior functionaries to withdraw slightly. He puffed out his chest and declared, "Ah, a divine dispatch. I am, in truth, Nicomedes, and I remain perpetually prepared to entertain communiques from the gods, who, quite naturally, discern my unparalleled aptitude for overseeing all facets of naval administration. However, rather than proceeding directly to impart Poseidon's unambiguous tidings regarding forthcoming meteorological conditions, Hermes discovered a burgeoning inspiration, ignited by the harbour master's sheer haughtiness, to adopt a decidedly alternative strategy. Indeed, Hermes articulated with a contemplative tone, Poseidon was remarkably precise concerning the protocol for this message's conveyance. He stipulated that it was to be entrusted exclusively to the most sagacious and seasoned maritime authority within Ethel, and furthermore, he expressed his desire for me to confirm that I had, in fact, located the appropriate individual. Nicomedes visibly swelled with an immense surge of self-congratulation. He confidently asserted, "Why, naturally, I am precisely that individual. There exists no soul in Ethel, nor indeed throughout the entirety of Greece, who possesses a more profound comprehension of the sea's temperaments and atmospheric phenomena than myself." "I am quite certain of your assertion," Hermes concurred with a gravitas that seemed entirely genuine. He added, "However, the sea god Poseidon explicitly instructed me to first ascertain your knowledge, purely as a measure of absolute certainty. He furnished me with a sequence of inquiries pertaining to naval affairs, dictating that the divine message was to be imparted solely to an individual capable of furnishing accurate responses. The junior officials present subtly exchanged knowing glances, a shared intuition suggesting that an intriguing development was imminent. Nicomedes, conversely, was so utterly convinced of his own purported mastery that he assented to the proposed examination without hesitation. He grandly proclaimed, "Very well, proceed with your interrogations. I shall forthwith exhibit the profound intellectual grasp that has justly earned me renown across all the Hellenic archipelagos." Hermes gave a grave nod and unrolled a finely prepared scroll. He posed. "The initial query is as follows. What constitutes the appropriate methodology for securing a fishing vessel during tempestuous weather, specifically when the prevailing winds originate from the southeast? Yet the ocean swells are surging from the northwest." In truth, this was a highly pragmatic inquiry, one that any truly seasoned harbour master ought to have been able to address with effortless proficiency. Yet Nicomedes had dedicated such an extensive period to his bureaucratic responsibilities and the cultivation of his own inflated ego that he had become entirely disconnected from the tangible demands of naval practice. He hesitated, equivocating for a brief interlude, before embarking upon an intricate and utterly erroneous exposition, detailing anchoring procedures that would have posed significant hazards even in tranquil conditions, let alone amidst the fury of a gale. Hermes attended with courteous demeanour, diligently inscribing observations upon his parchment. He remarked, "Fascinating." Then he proceeded, "And for the second question, should the fishing gear of one vessel become inextricably entwined with that of another during the hours of darkness, what established custom or protocol dictates the equitable resolution of such a predicament?" Once more, this represented rudimentary nautical law that any competent harbour master would be expected to command. Nevertheless, Nicomedes delivered yet another convoluted and fundamentally flawed response, one that would inevitably have fomented discord and contention instead of facilitating amicable settlement. As the interrogation progressed, it grew progressively apparent to every individual present in the chamber, with the singular exception of Nicomedes himself, that the harbour master's grasp of actual seafaring practicalities was astonishingly circumscribed. The junior functionaries commenced exhibiting signs of acute mortification on behalf of their senior, whilst Hermes steadfastly upheld his grave countenance, persisting in his meticulous note-taking. Subsequent to the fifth erroneous reply, Hermes slowly shook his head, a gesture tinged with feigned regret. He then stated, "I regret to inform you. It appears there has been an oversight. Pursuant to Poseidon's explicit directives, I am obliged to locate the most sagacious maritime authority in Ethial, and it is abundantly clear the individual is not present in this assembly." Nicomedes, the established harbour master, found himself suffused with a flush of both mortification and indignation. "What precisely do you imply?" he demanded, his voice tight with offence. "I am, in fact, the chief authority of this harbour, boasting a distinguished career spanning 20 years. 20 years of purely administrative experience, perhaps." A soft, measured voice interjected from the rear of the chamber. All heads pivoted towards an elderly fisherman, a venerable seafarer who had been patiently awaiting his turn to discuss some routine port matters. Directing his gaze towards Hermes, the old man continued, "But my young friend, if your quest is for an individual who possesses an authentic understanding of watercraft and meteorological phenomena, you might be well advised to seek out someone whose hands still become damp with the sea's embrace." This seasoned mariner, whose name was Demetrios, quickly demonstrated an unparalleled grasp of all Hermes' inquiries, and indeed a wealth of knowledge far beyond. He evinced mastery over the intricate patterns of the wind, sophisticated anchoring techniques, the delicate art of net repair, comprehensive boat maintenance, and the subtle, almost imperceptible indicators that heralded shifts in atmospheric conditions. Crucially, Demetrios articulated these complex subjects with the unassuming assurance of one who had devoted a lifetime to learning directly from the vast expanse of the ocean, a stark contrast to the ostentatious grandiloquence that typically characterized Nicomedes' pronouncements. "Ah," Hermes declared with a palpable sense of contentment, "I truly believe I have, after all, discovered the most suitable individual." He extended Poseidon's urgent message to the old fisherman, who meticulously perused its contents before nodding in sagacious comprehension. "This intelligence is indeed invaluable," Demetrios affirmed. "A particular weather pattern is currently developing that bears the potential to unleash sudden, violent storms over the forthcoming 10 days. I shall personally ensure that all fishing vessels are duly informed to remain in close proximity to the harbour and to vigilantly monitor for any ominous warning signs." As Demetrios departed to disseminate the crucial meteorological information among his fellow fishermen, Hermes redirected his attention to Nicomedes, offering a gentle, almost benevolent smile. "You know," he remarked genially, "Poseidon also entrusted me with a piece of counsel for you. He suggests that truly sagacious leaders cultivate the habit of listening far more than they speak, and that the most effective administrators are those who draw wisdom from the individuals actively engaged in the practical work. The harbour master, now utterly chastened by the recent demonstration, mumbled an indistinct remark about his intention to thoroughly review his maritime knowledge before summarily dismissing the assembly. As the other officials slowly filed out, Hermes could distinctly hear their quiet murmurs discussing how remarkably refreshing it had been to witness someone finally acknowledge the venerable fisherman's profound expertise. This particular brand of subtle yet impactful stratagem became something of a distinct specialty for Hermes. He possessed an extraordinary acuity for discerning individuals whose overweening arrogance or profound selfishness was inadvertently creating difficulties for others. Furthermore, he demonstrated a remarkable capacity to devise ingenious and creative methods to facilitate their viewing of their own conduct from an entirely novel perspective. In the ancient metropolis of Thebes, Hermes encountered a prosperous merchant named Apollodorus, who had become infamous for systematically defrauding his workers of their rightful earnings. Apollodorus's customary practice involved hiring labourers to diligently load and unload his ships, only to subsequently invent various pretexts to pay them significantly less than the compensation he had initially pledged. Hermes approached Apollodorus under the guise of an affluent foreign trader, ostensibly seeking a trustworthy individual to manage a substantial consignment of valuable commodities. He meticulously negotiated a most generous contract for Apollodorus's services, then shrewdly arranged for the merchant himself to undertake the majority of the strenuous physical labour, all while Hermes maintained a supervisory role. At the conclusion of what proved to be a long, utterly exhausting day, Hermes proceeded to fabricate a series of excuses to incrementally reduce Apollodorus's payment. The work, he claimed, had consumed more time than anticipated. A portion of the valuable goods, he asserted, had been handled with insufficient care. The merchant, he added, had indulged in an excessive number of breaks. By the time Hermes had completed his meticulous deductions, Apollodorus found himself receiving merely a fraction of the remuneration he had been promised. The exasperated merchant vehemently protested that such treatment was patently unfair, arguing that he had toiled diligently and was therefore entitled to his full payment. It was at this precise juncture that Hermes divested himself of his disguise, revealing his true identity, and pointed out with quiet conviction that Apollodorus had just personally experienced the very injustice he routinely inflicted upon his own workforce. "Now you truly comprehend," Hermes stated gently, "how it truly feels to exert oneself strenuously only to be unjustly deprived of fair compensation. Perhaps this profound experience will inspire you to treat your workers with a greater measure of equity and justice in the future." Apollodorus was so profoundly affected by this revelatory experience that he not only fundamentally altered his unscrupulous business practices, but also conscientiously sought out the workers he had previously cheated, diligently compensating them for all the wages he owed. However, Hermes's mischievous disposition was not exclusively directed towards imparting lessons to difficult individuals. On occasion, he would employ his extraordinary ingenuity simply to inject unexpected delight or spontaneous mirth into mundane situations. During a particularly solemn religious festival in Athens, where the elaborate ceremonies had grown so formal and ritualistic that the populace seemed to have entirely lost sight of the inherent joy that ought to reside at the very core of such a celebration, Hermes resolved to introduce a touch of light-hearted enchantment to the proceedings. He caused the ceremonial doves, traditionally released during the rituals to perform an intricate aerial ballet before gracefully ascending into the sky. He orchestrated the temple bells to chime forth in melodic harmonies rather than their customary simple peals. He ingeniously arranged for the offerings of succulent fruit to miraculously multiply, ensuring an abundant supply of sustenance for every single attendee of the festival. Most memorably, he imbued the majestic statue of Athena within the temple with the subtle appearance of nodding approvingly whenever children's laughter resonated through the sacred space during the ceremonies. This subtle encouragement prompted families to integrate their children more actively and playfully into the celebration, and consequently the festivals successfully recaptured the communal sense of joy that had been noticeably absent in recent years. Whispers of these delightful and charming tricks permeated throughout Athens, and people began to anticipate future festivals and ceremonies with a newfound and vibrant enthusiasm, perpetually intrigued by what pleasant surprises might await them. Hermes' burgeoning renown as a clever and benevolent trickster eventually permeated the lofty heights of Mount Olympus, reaching the other Olympian deities who subsequently began to solicit his unique talents whenever they required ingenious solutions to particularly delicate problems. When Apollo and Artemis found themselves embroiled in a minor disagreement, a squabble that was rendering the celestial atmosphere uncomfortable for all denizens of Olympus, Zeus himself entreated Hermes to intervene and resolve the situation diplomatically. Hermes meticulously arranged for both gods to receive identical, yet anonymous gifts. Exquisitely crafted lyres specially designed with unique strings that produced only harmonious and complementary sounds when played in unison. Apollo and Artemis were so utterly captivated by their magnificent new instruments that they spontaneously commenced collaborating on musical compositions, and their previous disagreement was entirely eclipsed and forgotten in the sheer joy of co-creating beautiful resonant music. As twilight descends upon the ancient Greek world, one might well envision Hermes settling into some tranquil, secluded spot, meticulously planning his next subtle stratagem or ingenious intercession. His pranks and clever wordplay were never merely a source of entertainment. Rather, they served as potent tools for subtly reshaping the world, rendering it a little wiser, a little kinder, and indeed a little more joyful than it had been before his intervention. As the seasons gracefully transitioned and Hermes' meticulously established network of roadside markers evolved into an integral component of daily Greek life, something profoundly beautiful began to unfold, an outcome that even the sagacious messenger god had not entirely anticipated. The unassuming stone markers he had strategically placed to aid travellers had, over time, begun to acquire a far deeper significance within the hearts and minds of the very people who relied upon them. This profound evolution commenced with modest expressions of thanks. A merchant, whose life had been providentially spared by a timely warning about lurking bandits, thoughtfully deposited a small offering of bread and wine beside the Hermes stone that had furnished the crucial intelligence. A family, having found refuge during a sudden tempest thanks to directions intricately carved on a marker, returned the following day with freshly picked wildflowers to lovingly place at its base. These spontaneous acts of thanksgiving gradually, almost imperceptibly, coalesced into a cherished tradition. Travellers began to leave small symbolic gifts at the Hermes stones, not merely as tokens of gratitude for assistance already rendered, but increasingly as heartfelt supplications for divine protection and sagacious guidance on the arduous journeys that lay ahead. Hermes himself discovered this burgeoning custom during one of his routine inspection tours of his extensive marker network. At a particular stone he had strategically positioned near a treacherous mountain pass, he found a small, poignant collection of offerings left by passing travellers, a few gleaming copper coins, some carefully dried fruit, a miniature wooden carving depicting a horse, and a handful of wildflowers someone had tenderly gathered along the roadside. Fastened to the stone with a piece of simple cord was a small clay tablet, its surface bearing a message scratched with earnest intent. "Thank you for keeping my father safe on his journey to Sparta. Please watch over him on his return trip. Alexia of Tegea." Upon reading this simple yet profoundly heartfelt message, Hermes experienced a warmth in his chest, a sensation far deeper and more resonant than the mere satisfaction he typically derived from his helpful interventions. Someone he had never personally encountered was entrusting him with the sacred duty of protecting her father, and she had taken the considerable effort to express her gratitude and profound concern in such a deeply touching manner. As Hermes continued his comprehensive inspection tour, he encountered similar offerings and messages adorning stone markers throughout his vast network. People were now regarding the Hermes stones not merely as practical sources of navigational information, but as sacred points of connection with the divine protection they fervently hoped would safeguard them on their perilous journeys. This profound realization ignited within Hermes an innovative idea, one that would fundamentally transform the marker stones from mere road signs into something infinitely more meaningful and powerfully spiritual. Working diligently and meticulously over the ensuing several months, Hermes commenced the systematic conversion of his most significant marker stones into veritable roadside shrines. He artfully carved small protective niches into the stones where travellers could securely deposit their offerings. He also thoughtfully incorporated simple altar spaces where individuals could perform brief prayers or conduct small personal ceremonies before embarking upon the more perilous segments of their travels. Most importantly, he began to dedicate his own time to these nascent shrines, personally appearing to travellers who seemed to be in particular need of additional assistance or guidance. On occasion, he would manifest in his true form as the majestic winged messenger god, offering direct divine aid to individuals confronting grave dangers. More frequently, however, he would adopt various helpful guises, an experienced traveller capable of imparting invaluable advice about prevailing road conditions, a knowledgeable local resident familiar with safe places to encamp, or a discerning merchant who could recommend honest innkeepers and fairly priced suppliers. These individual acts of benevolence quickly blossomed into an inexhaustible spring of narratives that permeated the entirety of the Hellenic civilization. Sojourners, upon their return to their native cities, would recount fascinating episodes of enigmatic benefactors who materialized precisely at the opportune moment, extending the exact succor required, only to dissipate into thin air with the same perplexing suddenness of their advent. A quintessential illustration of such a narrative might unfold thus. A youthful maiden embarking on a solitary pilgrimage to attend her sister's nuptials found herself disoriented within a labyrinthine woodland where numerous trails diverged in bewildering fashion. As twilight descended and an encroaching sense of dread began to seize her, she stumbled upon a modest Hermes shrine where she paused to earnestly supplicate for divine direction. While she was engaged in this fervent prayer, an venerable wayfarer approached, courteously offering to share his encampment for the approaching night. He appeared intimately acquainted with the intricacies of the forest and confidently assured her that a specific path, if followed at daybreak, would undeniably lead her safely to her intended destination. The aged gentleman generously shared his provisions with her, regaled her with diverting anecdotes that served to assuage her anxieties, and ensured she had a comfortable repose. At the dawn of the new day, he precisely indicated the correct route, furnished her with elaborate instructions to her sister's distant village, and thoughtfully supplied her with additional sustenance for the remainder of her journey. When the young woman eventually reached her destination unscathed and recounted her extraordinary experience, the populace instantly recognized it as yet another testament to Hermes' divine guardianship. The presence of the mysterious, helpful stranger, the impeccably timed intervention, and the magnanimous aid were all characteristic hallmarks of the swift messenger god's providential intercessions. As reports of these remarkable encounters proliferated, the modest roadside shrines dedicated to Hermes began to assume an increasingly pivotal role as essential stopping points for travellers traversing the length and breadth of Greece. Individuals meticulously orchestrated their itineraries to deliberately incorporate visits to significant Hermes shrines, where they could present votive offerings, petition for divine safeguarding, and occasionally experience direct manifestations of celestial assistance. Beyond their sacred function, these shrines concurrently evolved into vibrant communal hubs where wayfarers could converge, exchange valuable intelligence, and extend mutual support. Given that every individual who paused at a Hermes shrine was, by inherent definition, a voyager in pursuit of protection and navigational aid, an immediate and profound bond of empathy and collaborative spirit spontaneously formed among those who congregated there. Merchants, for instance, would readily impart crucial updates regarding market dynamics and economic conditions in various polis. Pious pilgrims would trade sagacious counsel concerning the most advantageous routes to reach revered temples and celebrated festivals. Ordinary families, too, would assist one another with a myriad of practical exigencies, ranging from the repair of broken cart axles to providing precise directions and offering judicious recommendations for suitable lodging. Hermes observed the organic genesis and flourishing of these burgeoning shrine communities with immense personal gratification. His initially unassuming marker stones had, through unforeseen circumstances, transmuted into something truly profound, eliciting the noblest facets of human temperament, altruism, collaborative effort, and reciprocal assistance among disparate individuals who shared no commonality save for the universal experience of being far removed from their domiciles. Yet the swift-footed messenger god was not content to merely be a passive spectator to this auspicious development. He proactively commenced championing the establishment of what he termed travellers' guilds, which were informal associations composed of individuals who regularly frequented specific routes and were thus uniquely positioned to furnish guidance and practical aid to less seasoned journeyers. A quintessential travellers' guild might comprise a consortium of merchants who habitually traversed the trade routes between Athens and Corinth, industrious farmers who transported their agricultural produce to bustling markets in various city-states, and skilled artisans who journeyed to different communities to ply their specialized crafts. Members of these guilds would convene periodically at designated Hermes shrines to disseminate vital intelligence concerning current road conditions, prevailing weather patterns, emerging commercial prospects, and potential perils along their routes. Crucially, guild members pledged a solemn commitment to render assistance to any distressed traveller they encountered, irrespective of whether that individual was a fellow guild member or not. This principled commitment effectively forged an expansive, informal network of reciprocal support that significantly enhanced the safety and overall pleasantness of travel for everyone. The travellers' guilds proved to be so remarkably efficacious that their responsibilities rapidly expanded far beyond the scope of mere roadside assistance. They began orchestrating collective journeys for individuals who harboured anxieties about embarking on solo expeditions. They strategically established emergency supply caches at remote shrines, ensuring that travellers could access essential provisions like food and water during unforeseen delays or unexpected hardships. They even ingeniously devised a rudimentary banking system that permitted merchants to deposit coinage in one city and subsequently withdraw an equivalent monetary value in another urban centre, thereby substantially mitigating the inherent dangers associated with transporting substantial sums of money over protracted journeys. As the intricate web of shrines and travellers' guilds continued its inexorable expansion, Hermes gradually recognized that he had, quite inadvertently, engineered a transformative force that was fundamentally reshaping the very essence of Greek civilization. The markedly improved safety and enhanced reliability of travel were catalyzing unprecedented levels of commercial exchange, profound cultural diffusion, and seamless communication between previously distant and disparate communities. Novel concepts and groundbreaking innovations were propagating with a swiftness hitherto unimaginable. Artists and erudite scholars were discovering receptive audiences for their creative endeavours and intellectual pursuits in locales they had never conceived of reaching. Ambitious young individuals were actively seeking educational opportunities and professional advancement far from their native birthplaces. Families, once geographically estranged, were now capable of maintaining closer and more consistent connections. Perhaps most profoundly, the shared cultural ethos that was organically evolving around the Hermes shrines and the burgeoning travellers' guilds was forging more robust and enduring bonds between the myriad Greek city-states and their constituent communities. People who had historically identified themselves primarily as Athenians or Spartans or Corinthians were gradually beginning to perceive themselves as integral components of a more expansive Hellenic community, intrinsically united by common tenets of hospitality, collaborative spirit, and mutual assistance. This profound cultural metamorphosis did not escape the discerning attention of Zeus, who, recognizing its far-reaching implications, summoned Hermes to engage in a discourse regarding the broader ramifications of the messenger god's roadside shrine initiative. "You have achieved something truly extraordinary," Zeus imparted to his son as they ambled together through an exquisite garden nestled upon the celestial heights of Mount Olympus. "What commenced as a pragmatic solution to the challenges of travel has evolved into a formidable force for both the unification and the strengthening of the entire Greek world." Hermes experienced a profound sense of gratification at receiving such unequivocal recognition from his esteemed father. Yet he was simultaneously contemplative about the weighty responsibilities that accompanied his burgeoning success. I have been earnestly considering how best to ensure that this cherished spirit of cooperation and mutual assistance endures indefinitely, he articulated. The shrines and guilds are currently functioning admirably, but their continued efficacy fundamentally relies upon individuals consistently choosing to be magnanimous and helpful towards strangers. Zeus acknowledged this sagacious observation with an approving nod. That is precisely the pertinent question one should be posing. How do we effectively incentivize people to uphold these commendable behaviors, even when doing so may prove inconvenient or entail a personal cost? Hermes had in fact been meticulously contemplating this very challenge for a considerable period, and had formulated several insightful concepts that he was eager to impart to his father. I believe the fundamental principle lies in guaranteeing that every participant derives tangible benefit from the overarching system, he asserted. When individuals perceive that their own acts of generosity towards unknown travellers ultimately result in their receiving assistance when they themselves are in need, they are demonstrably more inclined to continue their active participation. This profound insight would subsequently serve as Hermes' guiding philosophy as he persisted in developing and refining the intricate network of roadside shrines and travellers' guilds, ceaselessly seeking innovative methods to ensure that the system remained perpetually sustainable and equitably advantageous for all involved. As twilight descends over the serene shrines scattered along the ancient Greek thoroughfares, one might envision weary travellers congregating around crackling fires, exchanging compelling narratives of their arduous journeys, and meticulously planning the ensuing day's passage, whilst Hermes, from the ethereal shadows, observes with profound satisfaction, fully cognizant that his simple yet brilliant idea for aiding stranded families has blossomed into a monumental endeavour that now touches every corner of the ancient world. As Hermes' esteemed reputation as the quintessential protector of travellers and the vigilant guardian of boundaries burgeoned throughout the entirety of the Greek world, Zeus began to ponder whether his youthful, swift-footed messenger was prepared to shoulder the most solemn and intrinsically challenging of all divine responsibilities. There existed one particular type of journey that demanded celestial guidance more profoundly than any other, one ultimate boundary that necessitated the most meticulous and compassionate traverse, and one specific cohort of voyagers who were, without question, in the direst need of a supremely trustworthy guide. It was upon a tranquil autumnal evening, when the initial cool breezes began their descent from the majestic mountains and the annual olive harvest was drawing to a close, that Zeus formally summoned Hermes to the magnificent great hall of Mount Olympus for a discourse that would irrevocably alter the messenger god's divine portfolio forever. "Hermes," Zeus commenced, his voice imbued with a gravitas that instantly conveyed to the young god the extraordinary nature of this convocation. "Your exemplary work with the intricate network of roads and the countless travellers who traverse them has revealed to me something profoundly significant about your inherent character. You possess an innate understanding not merely of how to shepherd individuals from one geographical location to another, but more importantly, how to expertly guide them through the most arduous and transformative transitions of their very existence." Hermes listened with unwavering attention, keenly sensing that his venerable father was meticulously building towards an announcement of immense consequence. "There exists a singular type of journey," Zeus continued, his gaze unwavering, that necessitates the most supremely skilled and unequivocally compassionate guide of all. It is a passage that every mortal being must, without exception, eventually undertake, yet it is one for which they can never truly prepare themselves. It is, in essence, the ultimate transition from the vibrant world of the living to the enigmatic realm of the dead. A profound, solemn weight settled upon Hermes' shoulders as he began to fully comprehend the monumental nature of the request Zeus was about to bestow upon him. For far too long, Zeus elucidated, his voice tinged with a subtle regret. The countless souls departing from their mortal lives have been compelled to undertake this profoundly difficult transition devoid of proper guidance. Consequently, some become tragically lost amidst the liminal spaces between worlds, utterly bewildered and terror-stricken by the unfamiliar journey that stretches out before them. Others, in their profound attachment, vehemently resist the inevitable passage, clinging desperately to the world they are leaving behind, and in doing so, inflicting sorrow upon both themselves and their grieving loved ones. Zeus rose from his ornate throne and slowly strode towards a grand window that offered an expansive panorama of the Greek countryside, where the faint, flickering lights of innumerable homes began to appear in the encroaching darkness. It is my express will that you henceforth serve as Psychopomp, the sacred guide whose solemn duty it is to assist souls in making the monumental transition from life to death with the utmost dignity, profound peace, and a comprehensive understanding. Within the hallowed pantheon of divine duties, the distinguished office of Psychopomp stood as one of the most profoundly sacred obligations. This pivotal role necessitated not merely the inherent capacity to traverse the ethereal boundaries between disparate worlds, but equally the profound sagacity to assist bewildered and apprehensive spirits in comprehending their unfolding fate. It also demanded an abundant wellspring of empathy to assuage their anxieties concerning the enigmatic voyage that lay before them. Hermes, ever the diligent deity, embraced this freshly bestowed mandate with the solemnity and gravity it unequivocally merited. Yet he infused this weighty task with the identical imaginative ingenuity and profound contemplation that had consistently marked his prior endeavours. Eschewing a mere perfunctory escort service for souls from one dominion to the next, he embarked upon devising an exhaustive and empathetic methodology, aimed at assisting both those approaching their final moments and their grieving kin in navigating the intricate passage of demise and subsequent metamorphosis. His initial groundbreaking initiative involved making discreet appearances to mortals in the twilight phases of their existence, frequently adopting the guise of a benevolent stranger or a solicitous confidant. This strategic intervention served to tenderly acclimate them to the forthcoming transition. Far from permitting death to descend as an abrupt and terrifying onslaught, Hermes meticulously guided individuals toward a clearer comprehension of their present circumstances and what lay on the horizon. For instance, he might manifest before a venerable tiller of the soil as a fellow voyager, settling beside the man's deathbed to softly narrate tales of far-off locales and tranquil odysseys. To a youthful mother grappling with arduous childbirth complications, he could materialize as a sagacious midwife, gently illuminating the profound truth that on occasion, the most profound expression of affection resides in the act of relinquishment. For a combatant grievously wounded on the battlefield, he might assume the form of a loyal comrade, conversing earnestly about valour, obligations honourably discharged, and the serene repose that invariably follows arduous conflict. In every distinct scenario, Hermes meticulously customized his methodology to align with the specific requirements, deeply rooted apprehensions, and cognitive framework of the individual, while he steadfastly refrained from any deceit regarding their impending fate. His profound assistance enabled people to perceive mortality not as a dreadful culmination, but rather as an inherent and seamless progression into an altered modality of being. Of arguably greater significance, Hermes extended his compassionate outreach to encompass the families themselves, diligently instructing them on how to more proficiently uphold their cherished, departing kin. He imparted invaluable lessons on cultivating serene and comforting surroundings conducive to the dying process, guiding them in articulating heartfelt farewells and demonstrating the profound grace of releasing their grip with genuine affection rather than with desperate, tenacious clinging. He meticulously illustrated to these families the transformative power of assembling around their loved ones, not with expressions of terror and lamentation, but rather with an atmosphere imbued with cherished anecdotes, soothing melodies, and tender dialogues that eloquently commemorated the individual's life. This approach ensured that the departing soul felt enveloped by an aura of profound love and affirmation as they readied themselves for their ultimate voyage. Upon the precise advent of the moment of true demise, Hermes would manifest in his unadulterated divine visage, stepping forth to shepherd the recently departed spirit through the intricate metamorphosis between the mortal coil and the afterlife. His very presence exuded an aura of profound tranquility and steady reassurance, and his unparalleled grasp of intricate peregrinations and existential thresholds rendered him an archetypal conductor for this paramount of all journeys. The tenuous thoroughfare connecting the vibrant dominion of the living with the sombre precincts of the deceased was far from a straightforward itinerary, incapable of being delineated by mundane markers or conventional signposts. Instead, it comprised an enigmatic transit, concurrently existing partially within the tangible material world and partially within ethereal dimensions utterly beyond the grasp of human comprehension. Spirits embarking on this momentous expedition thus required an adept mentor capable of assisting them in traversing not merely the spatial intricacies, but also the profound emotional and spiritual dimensions inherent in relinquishing one mode of being and embracing an entirely new state of existence. In the course of his extensive duties, Hermes discerned a recurring pattern. Numerous souls exhibited a profound reluctance to finalize their passage, primarily due to lingering anxieties concerning the cherished individuals they were leaving in the mortal sphere. For instance, a maternal spirit might steadfastly decline to traverse into the dominion of the departed, her resolve stemming from an overwhelming preoccupation with the welfare of her tender offspring. Similarly, an agriculturalist might actively resist the ultimate transition, plagued by worries over the stewardship of his livestock and harvests. To assuage these deeply rooted concerns, Hermes ingeniously integrated concise, supervised sojourns to the world of the living into his established guidance protocols. He would permit these anxious souls to witness firsthand that their families were indeed receiving diligent care, that their earthly obligations were being capably managed by others, and that their beloved kin, though naturally experiencing profound sorrow, possessed the fortitude to proceed with their lives. These transient glimpses into the enduring vitality of the mortal realm proved instrumental in enabling spirits to relinquish their terrestrial preoccupations and complete their sacred journey with a newfound serenity of spirit. Nevertheless, Hermes exercised meticulous caution, ensuring these visitations remained succinct and purposefully directed, keenly aware that excessive loitering between the planes of existence could prove detrimental to both the departed soul and the living individuals they had left behind. As tidings of Hermes' profoundly empathetic and innovative guidance permeated the entirety of the Hellenic world, a palpable shift began to occur in the collective consciousness. Mortals commenced to shed a measure of their ingrained apprehension regarding death and the act of dying. Familial units, once gripped by trepidation, now initiated preparations for life's ultimate chapter with augmented sagacity and markedly diminished alarm. Concurrently, communities across the land progressively forged intricate rituals and time-honored customs that not only accorded due reverence to the solemn process of passing, but also joyfully commemorated the vibrant existences of those embarking upon their final departure. However, the purview of Hermes' responsibilities as psychopomp transcended the mere facilitation of individual demises, extending to encompass grander, more calamitous events that impacted entire populaces. In instances where devastating plagues, widespread conflicts, or cataclysmic natural phenomena indiscriminately claimed a multitude of lives simultaneously, he would labor with unflagging diligence to guarantee that each and every soul received meticulous and appropriate guidance, irrespective of the inherent pandemonium surrounding their departure. Amidst these harrowing episodes of mass casualties, Hermes would orchestrate the intricate guidance procedures with the identical meticulousness and organizational prowess that he habitually applied to the oversight of his vast network of terrestrial waymarkers. He personally ensured that no spirit was inadvertently overlooked or condemned to drift in bewilderment between the planes of existence, and he proactively liaised with other celestial entities to secure fitting succor and support for the grieving survivors. Among the most intricate and demanding facets of Hermes' responsibilities as psychopomp lay in ministering to spirits whose demise occurred amidst profound states of acute emotional disquietude. This category included individuals slain in paroxysms of wrath, those who expired while harboring entrenched animosities, or persons who passed away utterly consumed by the gnawing pangs of culpability or remorse. Such souls frequently encountered immense difficulty in disentangling themselves from their potent emotions and progressing upon their post-mortem spiritual trajectory. For these deeply afflicted spirits, Hermes meticulously devised specialized guidance methodologies expressly designed to aid them in processing and ultimately shedding their weighty emotional encumbrances prior to the finalization of their transition. He might dedicate considerable periods to a single soul, patiently assisting them in deciphering the causal events that had sculpted their profound sentiments and enabling them to discover avenues for achieving inner peace with their past experiences. On occasion, this intricate process entailed orchestrating fleeting interactions between the departed spirit and living individuals with whom a reconciliation was desperately needed. For instance, a son who had met his end while estranged from his paternal figure might be granted the capacity to convey forgiveness through evocative dreams or subtle omens. A woman who had passed away, consumed by a sense of profound guilt, might be gently guided to perceive that her perceived missteps were, in essence, comprehensible human fallibilities that did not fundamentally diminish her inherent worth as a being. These profound healing interventions demanded an extraordinary degree of finesse and acute perceptiveness, as Hermes was compelled to meticulously balance the pressing requirements of the departed soul with the paramount well-being of living persons who might be profoundly affected by any supernatural communion with their deceased loved ones. With the accumulation of extensive practical experience in his multifaceted capacity as psychopomp, Hermes commenced to discern discernible patterns in the diverse manners in which individuals confronted the prospect of death and the act of dying itself. He observed that those who had cultivated existences characterized by munificence, profound empathy, and unyielding rectitude generally navigated the ultimate transition with considerably greater ease than those whose lives had been marked by self-centeredness, malevolence, or deceit. Furthermore, individuals who had nurtured robust and enduring bonds with their familial members and close companions typically harbored fewer unaddressed regrets and unresolved anxieties prior to their departure. This astute observation propelled Hermes to formulate yet another groundbreaking methodology within his psychopomp responsibilities. Rather than passively awaiting the imminent approach of death to commence preparing individuals for their eventual transition, he initiated a subtle yet persistent campaign, gently prompting living persons to conduct their lives in a manner that would inherently simplify their eventual demise and subsequent metamorphosis. Through his manifold disguises and discreet interventions within the mortal sphere, Hermes would delicately impress upon people the paramount significance of resolving interpersonal disputes, articulating their affections and extending benevolence towards their fellow beings. He endeavored to enlighten humanity on the profound truth that the very fabric of their daily existence would exert a significant influence upon their experience when the appointed hour arrived to relinquish those lives. This pioneering and forward-thinking methodology regarding death preparedness exerted truly profound and far-reaching repercussions across the entirety of Greek civilization. Mortals, awakened to this new perspective, began to approach their interpersonal relationships with heightened earnestness, investing greater effort in assuaging conflicts and mending long-standing grievances. Concurrently, communities organically cultivated more robust and comprehensive support frameworks dedicated to the meticulous care of their elderly, their ailing, and their dying members. Intellectual discourse concerning the profound significance of both existence and mortality became demonstrably more prevalent and considerably more contemplative, fostering a deeper collective introspection. The distinguished deities residing atop Mount Olympus observed Hermes' diligent endeavours as psychopomp with an abiding sense of profound reverence and genuine admiration. Hades, the formidable sovereign of the chthonic underworld, evinced particular appreciation for Hermes' consummate skill in facilitating the arrival of souls into the dominion of the departed in a state characterized by tranquil acceptance rather than tumultuous dread and recalcitrance. Your sagacious guidance, Hades conveyed to Hermes during one of their customary colloquies concerning transitioning spirits, renders my own monumental tasks considerably less arduous. When individuals reach this realm already possessing a clear understanding and peaceful acceptance of their altered circumstances, They assimilate with remarkable rapidity into their new mode of existence. Even Athena, the revered goddess of strategic sagacity, lauded Hermes' pioneering methodologies in guiding the deceased. "You have unequivocally transmuted the act of dying," she thoughtfully remarked, "from a harrowing ordeal defined by terror and bewilderment into a profound prospect for personal evolution, meaningful atonement, and elevated spiritual maturation. Indeed, that exemplifies genuine wisdom in practical application. With the inexorable march of time and Hermes' sustained dedication to his sacred responsibilities as psychopomp, he cultivated an increasingly profound comprehension of the intricate interconnections weaving through all of his multifarious divine duties. His long-standing engagement with the superintendence of pathways and the facilitation of terrestrial travel had instilled within him an acute awareness of the critical import of secure transit and dependable mentorship. His vigilant oversight of mercantile endeavours had unequivocally demonstrated to him the intrinsic worth of equitable transactions and reciprocal reliance. Furthermore, his renowned capacity as a cunning trickster had eloquently showcased the formidable potency of sagacity and inventive problem-solving in surmounting formidable obstacles. Each of these accumulated proficiencies and penetrating insights proved utterly indispensable in his evolving role as a celestial intermediary between disparate realms. Mortality, he ultimately apprehended, was quite simply the quintessential expedition, the definitive traversal of boundaries, the singular, most momentous metamorphosis any individual spirit would ever undertake. And, akin to all significant voyages, it unfolded with immeasurably greater serenity and efficacy when the voyager was accompanied by a discerning, dependable, and profoundly empathetic guide. When twilight descends upon the ancient Hellenic civilization, and households convene around their glowing hearths to recount the day's events and ready themselves for tranquil slumber, one might easily imagine Hermes, the divine messenger, traversing the deepening shadows. He would be attentively accompanying a departing spirit as it embarks upon the serene yet profound journey from the realm of the living to the unknown beyond. His benevolent attendance offers not just comfort, but also crucial direction during that enigmatic transition, an ultimate voyage that every individual is destined to undertake.